All right, all right. What's up, everybody? We finally got started. We got caught up chit-chatting when like when we were supposed to be streaming. We were just talking about all kinds of random stuff. So everyone had to just sit here and wait. Okay, let's see. All right, starting now, you got to post. Okay, Igor, you're the first to get 1,000 Lance Loot. Oh my god, I can't talk. Jonas, you get 500, and let's get our third person. Ilinks, you get 250. What? Okay, that makes no sense. So Illink says, I donate my Lance Loots to Peanut Butter Schnorgels. I hope I just didn't say one of those horrible words that actually means something awful. When they make people say a person's name and then it's like, Mike Hunt or something like that. And they're like, hey, Mike Hunt. So please don't make me say awful. Oh, great. Now that I said it, they're totally going to do it at the chat.
Oh, it's totally happening.
Oh, no. Okay. So we're having the most chill philosophy conversations on the YouTubes. This is the high production quality stuff that you're going to get. You could see I've got a purple LED light behind a house plant. So that's how you know we're rocking it with the high studio production. Yes. I got a cactus. I don't even know what side I'm on. There's a cactus. You can't mess with that. What do you got in your background?
I have a squirrel and a piece of paper left over from I'm doing a explication of Don Marquis, Why Abortion's Immoral. And I always do something different with the squirrel. And that red lamp is back there just because of you. Because I, in the video where I responded to your video, responding to me, responding to you, responding to whatever, you had mentioned liking your purple light. And I was like, well, in honor of Lance, I'll put it's the only colored lamp I have. It's like an old IKEA lamp, not high tech.
But yeah, I've got an IKEA desk and this thing is falling apart. I had to put a cloth over it because the material is like coming apart so much that there's exposed wood and it like was cutting my arms. So I'll have to show people at some point.
A little disposable, the IKEA furniture.
I've had this thing for 4 or 5 years, so it's lasted forever. I did switch my chair out. I don't know if people know. I guess you can't really see it. This is a new chair. So I did get a new chair finally after years of terrible back pain. So yeah, we got the good equipment here. Oh, I see the red light shining on my face. Check that out. Okay. What are we talking about? Just introduce yourself. Tell people who you are. Some of them may not have seen you before. Who are you? What do you do?
My channel is Philosopfunculus. I'm Chad. I teach philosophy, or I taught philosophy for a long time, and I recently quit or retired. And I just want to try to it's mostly teaching. It's mostly trying to get people to engage with the big arguments in philosophy or cool philosophical stuff in order to think better, think about it. And it just so happens that I ended up stumbling on me doing some relatively amateurish, but I think interesting meta-ethics sorts of stuff that caught Lance's attention from a common viewer, I think. So I think that's about it. I'll talk about anything.
Okay. Yeah. I've reviewed videos from people that like started their channel a week ago. And then I'm like, I'm going to do a 3-hour review of why they're wrong about everything. So I'm always worried that people are going to find that offensive.
I would think people would be stoked about it because they're getting attention, right?
Yeah. But my channel's so small that my attention isn't even very noteworthy. Like I'm still not at 2,000 subscribers. And you see all these huge channels, and I don't know whether to just be happy there's big channels or to just have bitter envy that just eats away at my soul. I think I go with the second one most of the time.
Well, if I never opted out of credits or teaching requirements, I would have, when I was full-time a faculty member, I would have been doing 5 and 5 community college, 5 classes and 5 classes. It's a lot.
I can't even imagine that.
So I think of it as, hey, I don't really need to be competing for the money. I think it'd be cool as hell to have a huge channel, but I figure if I can have more than 125 people watching a video, that's more students than I'd have in a semester, and that's my measuring stick of success. But I'm also lucky enough not to try to have to try to make a living at it. So if it's 50 people or 5,000 or 500,000, I'm stoked. And your viewers are super engaged and active, at least a handful of them.
So yeah, you see channels.
That's my goal.
Yeah. You see channels where the chat is kind of lame, but we have the good people in the chat or whatever you call them.
Yeah, no,
Viewers.
I'm way more interested in engagement, and I always try to talk about like creating the coolest community of talking about this stuff we can. And I think yours is
But
very different, though. You're kind of in different niches or
yeah,
niches, because you're doing a lot of the time much more kind of sophisticated kind of academic stuff, which I think is cool as hell
not as
too.
much as some people. Have you seen Kane B's videos?
Huh, I actually saw a little bit of one because someone had suggested it or mentioned it in the chat, but I think it was only like a snippet. Is it
Okay. Yeah. Kane B just gets right into it. It's like, this video is about this topic. We're going to read these articles. Boom, let's go. And there's no messing around.
I think
So
that's interesting. That's
yeah.
really great for people who are interested in it. I don't know if like folks who have never taken a philosophy class are going to be super interested in jumping in and like, oh, let's go and right, like questions that might come up today. Well, can you compare like Foot's conception of value and goodness with someone else's, and how are we going to do that? It takes a little background, I think, to just jump right into those things, and so we'll see
Yeah,
where we
but
land.
I don't want to, our first conversation, we ended up just talking about stuff, talking about online
Yeah,
communities and all that. People want to hear the ethics stuff. So we got to get into
yeah,
that.
I'm ready. Can I have I
So
have questions
yeah,
that I
hit
think
me
will
with a
start
question.
just
Let's do it.
to characterize like some of the things I think with regard to how the discussion will go. Like, where do you stand, and how are you most comfortable characterizing what you feel is like a solid conception of we'll start with those two, like a conception of the good and a conception of value, not specifically what they are, but when you're talking about goodness, what do you think, what are you talking about there, and how do you think is the best way to approach it?
Yeah. So essentially, I just think that there are just descriptive facts. There are
Okay.
facts about what is the case. And among the facts that are the case, there are facts about the sorts of things that beings care about.
Okay.
So, I care about stuff, you care about stuff.
Right.
And then there are facts about what sorts of actions, rules, procedures would be more or less conducive to achieving the goals or interests of those beings. And to the extent that there's anything productive to be achieved in ethics or moral philosophy or practical philosophy more generally, it's a question of navigating navigating those questions about, okay, conditional on your goals, what would be the best means of achieving those goals or achieving what you want. But I don't really think that there are facts about what your goals ought to be or what your values ought to be. I take them as givens. It's just psychological facts about you. Kind of like, to me, it wouldn't make much sense to say, my favorite color is purple, for someone to say, but justify why
Right. Right.
purple is your favorite color. I don't think that makes a lot of sense. So for me, value and the good are reducible to certain kinds of psychological attitudes or preferences that you could say that agents or beings have.
Right. So, and I think that that's really helpful, and it clarifies how am I like I mentioned it last time we talked, that some of the looseness of the language that I had going in that first video of mine that you looked at, um, because I think it's very easy, and I'm certainly guilty of it, to kind of sort of conflate and confuse and talk about a conception of value or what's valuable as kind of shorthand for what might be talked about as the good or a conception of the good. Um, and I think that that's where a big chunk of what might appear to be our disagreement might lie, is in some of the discussion I was having regarding value versus valuable, if that rings a bell. You've done like 27 live streams since we last spoke. So you're like always on here rocking it. I'm like, oh my God, it's like you're producing like folks who is it still a thing that people like stream video game play or whatever, and
Yeah, people still do that.
like
Sure.
like you do philosophy like dudes are playing in Call of Duty, and like I'm just gonna hop on today and rock out some fort and have people watch me play, and that's what Lance does. Hop on and let me just talk about some abstract philosophical problem. It's cool. But the question I have there is, when we're talking about do you think at least the language is clear when we're talking about value, valuable, and the good? Because I think I might have been a little misleading or confused in how I talked about it before. We can go to what was an example you used? Either that gold example or the feet, your feet being valuable, or if you want to walk. Um, do those examples sort of make sense?
Yeah, I don't know if you want to unpack that stuff or I should say something. How do you want to proceed?
Well, because I'm happy to make it work however, whatever jargon works best for you, as long as I understand it. And there's a good chance I won't. But like I would want to say that, and I think I kind of unpacked it that way, is if one enjoys walking, then they find their feet to be valuable, uh, whether they're consciously aware of the value of their feet, because their feet are necessary for walking on their feet. I don't want to, right? Like someone's going to be like, there's always someone who's like, well, you could walk if you were a double amputee and had what. That's all well and good. I totally recognize that, but just I think if you value walking on your feet are valuable to you. And then I would
Yeah.
say if walking on your feet led to something good, then we would say, I mean, that's a weird kind of example, maybe, that they were morally valuable if it were the case that led to something good, something like
So
that.
I'm going to have one issue I'm going to have with this sort of thing is that there's going to be a difference between the attitudes, beliefs, and standards that I have that are like a current states, like they're
Yeah.
states of mind that I am in or that I could come to be in. So like I value my family. I can tell you right now, like I care
Yeah.
about my wife or what I care about my dogs.
Right.
Now there are like facts about what the universe is like that would be that are like necessary or at least like contingently like conditional on this being the way that it is. This set of
Yeah.
events needed to occur in order for my dog to currently exist. Okay.
Yes.
Now, I I can recognize that in reflection that hey, it's important that this like natural selection existed to give rise
Yeah.
to dogs, or else my dog wouldn't exist. But I don't think that I'm thereby obligated to care about or value natural selection, and I certainly don't like have a state of mind or attitude of caring. You might say that it's like natural selection is valuable insofar as it was necessary for there to have been natural selection in order for me to have my current dog. Um, now, if you say that, I want to unpack what that means because to me, what that's going to bottom out in is something like it was like causally necessary. And I could grant that, but that doesn't mean that I care about natural selection. I would just say, yeah, I agree. It's causally necessary for the X, Y, and Z to have occurred in order for me to have my dog. I
Yeah.
can grant that, but I'm worried
Yeah.
about leveraging using the term valuable to be
Yeah.
identical to causally
Yeah.
necessary to then say that I have to value other people's values because I could just grant, for
Right.
instance, other people's personhood is causally necessary for them to make decisions and value things. Okay, yeah, it's causally necessary, but that doesn't mean I have to care about their lives or their well-being.
I think if we were wanting to do this in the vein of the someone's going to destroy someone or own someone, which I don't think either of us are interested in, it's about to be very, very anticlimactic, and I might ruin it for half the people who are hoping for blood sport, which is the more I thought about kind of, especially that last video at the end of it. I think it was the last video you did. Um, you were saying it was kind of a nice, super fun little rant you went on of like, hey, if whatever you're saying doesn't uh, help me pursue or fulfill my goals or satisfy my goals, then to hell with whatever the hell you're talking about. Whether it's reason or math or logic, these are all things that I find to be useful because they help me satisfy my goals. And why on earth would I care about them or should I care about them if they don't? And if they get in the way of the things I care about and the goals I have, then all the worse for them. I'll get rid of them. Does this sound? Am I paraphrasing
Yep.
something?
Mhm.
And and you said, "Hey, I'm justifying all of these things on pragmatic grounds," and I loosely took it to kind of a combo platter of like justification and truth of pragmatic. Like, hey, this is I'll justify them on pragmatic grounds, and I may even go so far as to say the truth-making feature of claims is that they reflect some sort of pragmatic or practical efficacy for me. Either way, I was listening, I was like, yeah, I'm down. I'm never going to try to convince you otherwise. And I don't think I could. I don't think anybody could. Um, I don't know that there's a way, or it would, what an effort would look like to convince someone that they ought to care about those sorts of things if one takes a pragmatic sort of point of view. I don't even know what listening to that sort of rant, which I thought was really great, really helped me make sense of a lot of times you were saying, this seems so bizarre to me. This seems so weird to me. I'm like, what's the bizarre part? What's the weird part? And then finally, probably because I was slow to the game, was like, oh, yeah, it seems weird that one would think they ought to be compelled to care or compelled to worry or compelled to have some sort of psychological state such that they valued those things. And to me, it kicks back to kind of, right, one of the two, I think, really huge problems for Kant is, right, if he's going to get around stance dependence or subjectivity or however you want to put it, there's got to be something that motivates action other than one's subjective preferences, right? Like it can't be this feels good, or, right, I always would explain in terms, it can't be birthday cake. It can't be like, oh, I like grocery store birthday cake that's Crisco laden, or I don't, because then that can't be why one wants to be good for Kant. It can't be like, ooh, it feels good to me. It's based on my subjective preference. I want to pursue the goodwill. It's got to be that he lays it out, right? Like out of duty or respect, or the internally luminous goodwill demands, like drives you to be good, not because you want to or you feel good about it, but you're like somehow magically drawn to it, like it's the force and he's Yoda. Um, that's a legit. I mean, your view is, in a way, in my head, I'm thinking of it in terms of, yeah, Lance is just saying, I can't conceive of something that does that with regard to other people's values. That wouldn't be a, yeah, maybe I want to care about their values or maybe I don't, but there's no like some sort of logical or rational thing like drawing me to it. So I don't, was that like, that was a long-winded me trying to sort out what I think kind of where you're coming from. And I don't know if that's any good or makes any sense.
Yeah, that's basically where I'm coming from. So where I'm coming from is that acting on my goals and values is the most fundamental priority that I have, and it's not negotiable. Like I will act on my goals and values. And in fact, my current view is that I actually think I can only act on my goals and values because what I think, like at least if we're talking voluntary action, I think voluntary action just is acting in accord with your goals and values. Like what I think goals and values are like those actions which are motivating to you. And so, if it turns out that, I could be factually mistaken about what sorts of things motivate me. It could be that if someone presented me with the list of stance independent moral facts and I was convinced they were, I would suddenly find myself compelled to comply with them. But
Yeah.
to the extent that I felt myself complied, it would be filtered through and like be vis-a-vis my motivations. I'd have to want to. I'm not just a puppet that's like, must do good, don't know why, must do good. Like, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be like, oh, I want to do that. I want to do what's right. And then I would go do it. And I personally, I think this is how people are. I think all humans are like this. I think this is like a constitutive feature of agency. Like this is just what it means to be an agent, is to act on your goals and values.
No, and I think that it's interesting because I really think our views are very, very close in a lot of ways, except for one real big linchpin thing that makes it very different, I guess, which is I think that recognizing what it means to be an agent and acting on one's goals and values and everything else upon reflection, not that everybody's walking around hopefully reflecting all the time or shit wouldn't get done. One realizes, oh shit, being that sort of thing is valuable to me. And ultimately, I'm in a situation where there's, 8 billion other me's on the planet or people like me. And we've got to figure out a way to navigate that situation. And it's like bonkers complicated and weird because consciousness is involved, because we're all conscious beings with varying perspectives and points of views and stances. And it leads to two things I've been thinking about a lot lately since last I spoke with you. One of which has to do with, I think, how far away, when we're talking about realism or meta-ethical, anything metaphysical or moral psychology, how far away we get from what most people are thinking of with regard to ethics every day, or right and wrong, right? Like the level of abstraction, and I try to introduce it to students and remind myself, because it's one of the things. Another thing that I think is interesting, and maybe we could talk about in a minute, is how people come to the theoretical, ethical, or meta-ethical theoretical commitments they have, because no one's starting with their meta-ethical commitments and then determining, oh, it's right or wrong to lie. It's like we develop these meta-ethical theories and commitments based on what we probably already thought were true. And sorry for the tangent, but we're at this level of abstraction, and it always was interesting to me how people will, in an intro text, like what you'll get of Kant will be the first section of the foundations of the metaphysics of morals, right? Like you're going to get up to the categorical imperative, then you're going to get the examples about perfect and imperfect duties, lying to get a loan, don't kill yourself. It's all probably pretty familiar to folks who are, I imagine a bunch of your viewers are philosophy students, but no one ever really points out in that intro text, oh, wait, read the preface to this, where Kant's like, yeah, we're going to make this kind of Hume fork sort of distinction between rational empirical stuff. And I'm going to say all of philosophy that's anything empirically related will turn out to be physics or ethics. And then when I get to the ethics, I'm going to divide that up in terms of the formal and the practical considerations. So really, when we're doing ethics, we're talking about some formal logical structures that apply to ethics coupled with a practical anthropology. And then if we were to have a complete ethics, it would include all of those things. But what I'm doing today in the foundations is, right, like think about it, the foundations of the metaphysics of morals. And then the preface, he says, I'm focused on the formal part of that. Like, what does that even mean? Like, if I walked up to someone on the street, I was like, yeah, I want to talk to you about the formal part of the logical structure of right and wrong. Like, I don't even know what that really, I probably, depending on the day, might have a different explanation of what that means. So it's something that I really appreciated in one of the videos you were mentioning of like, we end up bouncing back and forth, right? Like you're talking about this super abstract stuff, but then you want to illustrate it with everyday examples, but the everyday examples might not capture it or might be misleading. So that reminder that, right, discussions of what's the right metaphysical status of good, or the moral psychology of valuing something, is pretty far removed from, oh, should I cheat on my girlfriend or not? Or should I cheat on my boyfriend or not? And then I used to, in intro classes, ethics classes, I would always let students choose the topics we were going to cover, like the applied ethics stuff, how we were going to apply these theories and cash them out. And for like 5 or 6 years straight, the number one topic that was chosen almost exclusively by women, little social commentary, was cheating, people being cheaters, infidelity. And it's like, I always ground that because it's like, that's not a topic I'm going to think of, but that's what's important to people, right? With regard to right and wrong and morality, it's, oh shit, how do I react to someone cheating on me? Or should I cheat on them? Not me, 27 levels of abstraction. Let me see if I can come up with a relational property that exists between an object in the world, two conscious beings, such that one has to respect the other in virtue of the other person existing. Long-winded rant. No idea if that was interesting or piqued anybody's curiosity, but it's a crazy level of abstraction that we're dealing with, I think. But given that level of abstraction, that was something that back to the why it might be anticlimactic, I don't think I could. The only way I would try, if I was going to try to convince Lance to adopt some sort of moral realist position, I would do it on pragmatic grounds, given what you've said. Like, I think there might be some practical efficacy for you to embrace moral realism. But
Yeah,
not
I'm happy to have that discussion with people. Can you give me 1 second to turn the lights on? I realize I'm sitting in the darkness,
absolutely.
and
I
I feel
thought it
very
was
silly.
mood. I thought you were going for some
No,
kind
no,
of
no,
mood.
it's not mood. It's just I me forgetting to turn the lights on. I don't know. 1 second.
Can entertain you all with a joke.
The lights are right there. I'm quick. I'm already
I
back.
was gonna
Okay.
tell a joke. For a
Oh
long
no,
time, I
I
was.
don't even know what the joke would be. I have no control over it. Um,
Uh,
yeah, I mean, there's a couple things I could say about that. I mean, at least one of them would just be,
right.
on my own view about a lot of this stuff. I think philosophical views are generally fairly practically inefficacious. I just don't think they make that much of a difference. If you look at a person, like if you were just observing a person going about their business in the world, like with a God's eye view, and like you're watching them go through their life, making decisions about infidelity or whether they're going to
Right.
shoplift or all that stuff. Most
Yeah.
people, I think, aren't making all those decisions, but maybe just legitimate, like real moral dilemmas that people that aren't just like I don't go through life just pondering like, am I going to steal from people? Like I'm not
Right.
just like an impromptu mugger. But we still encounter moral dilemmas here and there. Should you tell a white lie? Something like that.
Yeah.
Uh, if you observed a person doing all that stuff and they were not a philosopher, or maybe they retired from philosophy and they weren't speaking
Right.
about it, like you didn't have stuff like them saying, I'm a moral realist. Like you don't have any of that, right? And you just watched their everyday behavior. You can't tell if that person's a realist or not. There's no way.
Oh,
I don't think you could. Uh,
no, I think that's so important because one, I think a lot of times people, especially the way people talk about ethics or ethicists do or philosophers do, as if anybody ever acts as if philosophers have some sort of privileged access to being decent human beings, that's just insane, right? Like that's nuts. There are just as many assholes who are ethicists as are not ethicists. Um, and I think the value in studying the stuff and thinking about the stuff for me, just because it's not my particular interest, I absolutely think it's valuable. I don't want people in the chat to be like, this son of a bitch is saying metaethics isn't worth studying. No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's not the thing that I'm pursuing. But I think there's value in presenting people and thinking about this stuff so that we can reflect on it. Because I think in general, everybody at some point is like, fuck, did I do the right thing? Should I have done that? Not in the moment as some kind of like, it would be really weird if someone was trying to use this as like a real time decision making procedure, right? Like, okay, let me run this through the categorical imperative before I decide whether or not to go out with Donnie or something who I think's an asshole, but he's kind of hot, right? Like, is that what a good person would do? Can I universalize that? Ultimately, what is my maxim? Like that's not a thing, and it shouldn't be. But what I think people can do is say, "Hey, given who I is it cool for me to want to do X, Y, or Z?" And as a practical consideration, given where we are, and it's not advocating a particular political position, but pragmatically thinking about those things, if you're going to participate in political life, probably is a good thing. Like, hey, what do I really think is valuable? What do I think is good? Um, and I really do believe, and I tell this to people in the comment section, I probably ought to do it in a video and it'll come out. There are like a bunch of different ethical theoretical commitments that I think are all really good, right? Like I could swap out a kind of quasi pseudo neo Kantian position for some version of a sentimentalist or a motivist position that I turned into kind of an ideal observer theory or a rule governed sort of consequentialism. Um, they're all going to agree on like 98% of real world stuff, right? Like none of the theories are going to be like, yep, you probably ought to go out and start killing people just indiscriminately. They all more or less agree on a whole host of things. So I I think you're right. The practical application of uh, like theoretical philosophy flavored stuff probably not so huge. It reminded me of something that that's something I wanted to ask you about because I'm really interested in your answer. It's probably like 15 years ago. I have no idea. I will not be shocked because of how plugged in your viewers are if someone knows what the hell I'm talking about. Someone, and I forget who they were, faculty member somewhere on the West Coast, had an experimental ethics blog. This is how long ago it was, because do people still have blogs? Is that even really a thing? But he was talking about what reminded me of it is he did a thing on how someone did some research that like philosophers don't return library books on time or something, or
Yeah, I
do
already know who this
it.
is, and I could mention it if you want, but
Oh
I
no,
could
that's
wait for
fine.
you to finish.
Really? Oh, that's awesome. No, who is it?
It's Eric Schwitzgable, and the blog is called Splintered Minds, I believe, and the
Oh,
blog is still
cool.
going.
Well, that's rad as hell because he had a blog post about um like asking the question of how and why people thought they came to their philosophical or ethical commitments. And that question was really interesting to me because it seems very much like no one's really making their initial, like I didn't gravitate to Kant because I understood Kant at first. And it's the same. What popped into my head was I was doing a unit in an ethics class and I was teaching, I don't know, it was probably not Singer. I was probably doing like a Norcross's puppy thing. If you know that, uh,
No, I
it's
don't know it.
it's an applied ethics thing where it's super graphic, so I'm not going to go into it. But he basically describes if someone were on trial for doing to puppies what they do to chickens, you'd be like, oh my god, that's morally outrageous. And anytime I would teach animal rights stuff or animal welfare stuff, it ties in almost always with utilitarianism, right? Like a consequentialist view. And I taught long enough that I had plenty of students go on to study philosophy or do philosophy. And I would wager that half of the people who ended up going into philosophy and were utilitarians became utilitarians because they loved animals. And the first theory they encountered that took animals seriously was utilitarianism. So they decided, I'm going to be a utilitarianism. And then they spend the next 15, 20 years of their academic life trying to defend or work with this position, which is I think that's what everybody does. So I was wondering, like, what do you think drew you to your theoretical or ethical or meta-ethical position? And do you think that is right or true that oftentimes people, because I think it could be something as simple as I had a really engaging professor who happened to be a Kantian or happened to be a whatever. I just want to know what you thought about
Yeah.
that.
So I think there's a lot of like socio-cultural forces that account for why any particular philosophical position is as prominent as it is. I think certain philosophers have a greater force of personality or more ambition, or they're better situated to influence people, and that could snowball and lead to a formerly, seemingly moribund position, like reemerging and becoming
Yeah.
popular again. If there were enough people that were dedicated to like reviving logical positivism, you could see it revived in 20, 30 years. And there are people that are trying to revive various emergences within 20th century philosophy, ordinary language philosophy.
Yeah.
Avner Baz over at Tufts, he was a professor that was teaching at Tufts when I was a grad student there. I've read the first chapter of one of his books on. I thought it was awesome. So he's been trying to revive ordinary language philosophy. People keep saying it's dead, it's dead, it's dead. I don't think so. And I think all of these traditions, well, not all of them, but some of them have quite a lot of potential value.
Right.
So there are these sociological forces. They're going to be noisy, and it's going to be very difficult to pinpoint. Was it this person teaching at this place at this time? Did that influence people? So that I do think goes on, and I also think that there's these more local things like, hey, this philosophical position would be a useful tool for promoting my interest in animal welfare. I'm not so cynical that I think that people think through that in some Machiavellian way, like, this normative moral theory would be conducive
Oh
to
no, no, no.
rational. I think a lot of this happens outside of people's awareness, and they just don't realize that's why they're making these sorts of decisions. So yeah, I think both of those forces are at play. As far as myself, one thing I'll flag immediately is that any narrative I give is, not necessarily accurate.
Right. Yeah.
We give these retrospectives on why we did what we did and why we think what we think. And this is a point that Nick Chater makes in The Mind is Flat, is that much as we might theorize about why someone else did something, whether it's a real or a fictional person,
Yeah.
why did George Washington do this? Like
Yeah.
what drove Julius Caesar to cross the Rubicon instead of remaining where he was and not, setting himself on a course of inevitable conflict. Why did he do that? I don't know exactly what was going through his head. We could theorize. In much the way that we have to theorize about other people's actions, there's a sense in which we are theorizing about our own actions. So that's going on. So I can give you a theory, but I can't even know if it's accurate.
Right.
Now, as far as like, I could say a bit about what my interests were and how things ended up happening.
Right.
For me, when I started college, I was 16, and so what had happened, the reason I started a little bit early isn't because I was in some advanced placement courses or
Right.
anything. I'd actually dropped out of high school, so I had a lot of behavioral issues. Dropped out of high school, got a GED, and then started at a community college. Now, at the time, I had been a Christian and a big old conspiracy theorist. Every conspiracy theory. I thought the moon was a UFO. I thought there were aliens infiltrating the planet. Yeah, I thought crystal skulls had magic powers. I still have a couple somewhere. I have crystal skulls. So if it was weird, I believe it was cryptozoology, Bigfoot, Loch Ness Monster, all that stuff. I weave this very long narrative here, but I ran into James Randi, the magician and skeptic. He gave a presentation at my university. It totally just blew my mind. And I recall that I started getting into philosophy and psychology, and I was like, how could I be duped? How could I have such ignorant and ridiculous
Yeah.
beliefs? I don't think I'm stupid. So what was going on? And I got really into the psychology of religion and what drives people towards belief in the paranormal and that sort of thing. And quite a few things happened. I ended up getting involved with like atheist activism. So as part of the whole rising tide of new atheism. In retrospect, that's a little embarrassing, but I got involved with that.
Yeah.
The whole thing was people were way too enthusiastic and a lot of bad arguments tossed around. Somewhere along the way, I either realized I had been all along or whatever. I started identifying as a utilitarian, and specifically a classical utilitarian. I was like, you got to maximize utility.
Yeah.
And I I would go all the way. So in the whole rationality world, there's like this thing called like the utilitarian or hedonium shockwave. So
Okay.
the idea would be that imagine that you could produce the smallest, like you could produce like nanobots that are capable of they run simulations of extreme happiness. Well, if you could kill everybody and break down all matter in the universe and turn it into
Yeah.
those, like
Yeah.
little simulators of happiness, like a super matrix,
Yeah.
that would be the optimal thing to do from a utilitarian perspective. So I was like, yeah, release the shockwave, destroy the universe, turn it into simulations of happiness.
Okay.
That seems a little weird to me now. But at the time, I was all in on utilitarianism. You give me
No,
a
I can
utility
see.
monster, I'm like, yeah, shovel the people in, feed them to the utility monster. I'm all in.
Uh,
Somewhere along the way, I just stopped being that. And I'm not even sure when that happened. It
right.
happened in the past 5 or 6 years, kind of gradually. Now, you might think, it's your anti-realism. Being an anti-realist had this like innervating effect and eventually like dried up and atrophied your interest in normative moral philosophy. I don't think so, because I was an anti-realist way, way, way back then too, when I was like 16 or 17. So I was an anti-realist the whole time, and I had a normative moral view. And it took like 20 years for the normative moral view to just go away. In the intervening period, I'm not quite sure what happened. I do actually recall the papers, like the articles that I was reading that influenced me to develop my interests. And it's a specific exchange between two meta-ethicists, Richard Joyce and Stephen Finlay. So Richard
Okay.
Joyce is an error theorist. Stephen Finlay has a somewhat more complicated view. But basically, Finlay was criticizing error theory, and he wrote a critique of error theory called The Error in the Error Theory. I don't know if it's the exact title, but it's close enough. The Error in the Error Theory. Richard Joyce responded with a really cute paper called The Error in the Error in the Error Theory. And now it's reminding me of me reviewing your video, which was reviewing my video, reviewing your video. It's like and then I think Finlay wrote a paper. He didn't continue this. He wrote Errors Upon Errors, I think, or one of them
Okay.
did. And then Joyce responded with enough with the errors. And that was the end of the exchange.
Okay.
And it was this back and forth. And in that back and forth, it's two anti-realists. And I remember this phrase that stuck out to me. I don't remember which one of them said it. And it was something like we both agree, like them talking about one another. We both agree that what people mean when they make moral claims will not turn on what they would say when asked. And I thought to myself two things, like, one, why not? Why can't you just ask them? And two, okay, yeah, it probably wouldn't turn on what they would say if asked because they're not going to understand the questions. But doesn't it turn on what they themselves take themselves to be doing? And it became increasingly apparent that for many philosophers, the answer is no. That facts about what people mean when they make moral claims are not dependent on their communicative intent. That the meaning of sentences is somehow external to the communicative goals of the people involved in a conversation. And that struck me as absolutely bananas. I think there are facts about what people are trying to do when they communicate. I don't think there's any further facts about the meaning of sentences. And it became increasingly apparent a lot of philosophers take meaning to be like external to contexts.
Right.
And, that led to this, growing interest in experimental philosophy and empirical approaches to addressing these questions. And that's how things really got started. So that's several different aspects of things that triangulate on where I'm at now. I don't know how helpful that is, though.
No, I think to me, it was just interesting and something I was curious about, because thinking about this stuff and with my imperfect reflective awareness, when I was thinking about I think about this stuff far more than I probably would like in a way. It's like someone I guarantee in the chat will know, or if you don't, like, who is in this, right? Like philosophical problems grip you or something. You don't choose them or whatever. But like, I think the sort of ethical view that I am most comfortable with comes from the fact that I think I was always like really pissed off by bullies or injustice. And so, and I didn't come to Kant from Kant. I came to Kant I probably had been given, right, like the foundations and given the intro level Kant thing and been like that's insane. Because I'm sure the way I was taught was it's never okay to lie. Everything's wrong. Like, not a nuanced version, which just sounds dumb. And I'm like, fuck this guy. This sucks. But I came to it probably from Rawls, because it gave me something that was like, oh, there's a foundation for really being pissed off and justifies my being pissed off about unfairness and injustice. So Rawls probably got me to Course Guard, which got me back to Kant and reading Kant in a different way and understanding it, where it's like, had I been exposed to a certain flavor of utilitarianism or a certain flavor of a virtue ethic, or really, I think there's cool things to be said for Hume. If I would have read Hume in a different way, I could have ended up doing any of those. But I think it was all driven by like the ideas I have about respect and dignity of persons. And I'm sure we should get into some of those arguments, probably stem from that. Like, that's what motivated them, is I want to know how and why I'm justified in like being sick to my stomach when I'm looking at like when you're like flipping the channels. This will date me a little bit, flipping channels, and PBS comes on and it's a thing about, and I'm seeing folks in civil rights marches getting attacked by German shepherds and hit with fire hoses, and like, I can't watch that. I got to turn it off. This makes me sick to my stomach. How could people do that to each other? And I think that's what it was. Now, is my reflective understanding of that perfect? No, it could have been entirely some other psychological motivations. But I think we come to these theories, especially when we get into the metaethics stuff, and this is going to tie right into your view, things that we already value or goals that we already have, and our ethical or philosophical or theoretical commitments end up being consistent with those until we have maybe life-changing experiences like the magician or whomever. So I think that's the underpinning of my motivation, what I value, that I think I get from or is consistent with the sort of quasi pseudo neo-Kantian view. I don't want to besmirch him, is because it always drove me crazy when people weren't treated with what now I would say was dignity or respect. Like, I just don't like it. Like, and it might be being an anxious like, it might just have to do with having anxiety and being crazy. That's my flavor of crazy. And why, like, I couldn't watch a TV show when I was a kid if someone was going to be embarrassed. If a character was going to be embarrassed, I'd close my eyes and cover my ears and leave the room. Like, I couldn't stand seeing people feel uncomfortable or suffer. But I think that kind of segues into the ethical stuff that people might be interested in, with regard to personhood and seeing personhood as something being deserving to be treated with dignity and respect. And I think we can make it. I could make it fit some way with some sort of practical justification, such that it's not too far off from what you're talking about. And I have a hair in my nose that's driving me crazy.
The last part of what you said just reminded me of how much I would imagine you would hate Curb Your Enthusiasm, because that's all it is. Do you know Curb Your Enthusiasm?
Shows like that I've seen for like a second, and people who enjoy them, it's like, I don't want to watch this. I don't want to watch people doing
all it is the most awkward and embarrassing situations.
Yeah. Well, I
just cringe. I'm like, oh,
an example. I was trying to put together an example of a philosophy paper in class as a collaborative thing with the students to say, like, here's what an outline for a philosophy paper could look like, an argumentative paper, like an applied ethics paper. And I did a Kantian account of how fail videos were exploitative and violating the personhood of the people who failed, because you're obviously, like, using them as a means to an end. But those sorts of, like, I don't understand it. That's a whole separate social and political and psychological discussion. Like, fail videos, like, no, I don't want to see that. I can see it with cats, because I've been allergic to cats my whole life. And I think they're all a little bit evil because they don't give a shit about anybody or anything. So seeing cats leap up and fall because I know they're not getting hurt, I can laugh at that. But people falling on ice or making an ass of themselves, or even like, oh my God, in a million years, I would never watch the Borat movies. Hell no. Hell no. Fuck that guy. Why would you want to go around and just be shitty to people and think it's funny because they have opposing political views to you? Or like Matt Walsh or Charlie Kirk or any of those people? Fuck you. Right? Like, that's just like bullying people. And I think I could make a case that it's morally wrong and it's shitty and it's not serving anybody's interests other than your short-term weird, I make myself feel better about myself in the moment by being mean to people.
Yeah, I got something I could say about that regarding the dam freezing, some of what's motivating me for what I do currently. But the other thing I wanted to do is point out that, we're kind of talking about our motivations, and we're adding like a personal sort of biographical element to how we're approaching philosophy. And we're getting people in the comments that they want the analytic stuff. They want me to be like, premise 1, premise 2. Well, we can, but I want to make a comment about the other stuff too, because, we're sounding like awful continental philosophers. Like, they're, pretty soon I'm going to have a martini in my hand and a cigar. And then it's just going to be like
cloves and a beret. We'll be okay.
Yeah, and then I'll be talking about the essence of being is becoming within itself, within the spirit of becoming of the essence of what was within itself. Obviously. So I'll show you some of the chats. Let's see. We've got Matt Springfield says, I'd love to get more clarity on what exactly these two disagree about. Igor still wants to hear the joke that you were going to say. We have Sapir says, what counts as justification in the relevant sense? I think that's in respect to you saying you wanted like a justification for the stance that you took. But here's where we're getting the real complaints. Zictomorph says, are we just accepting that they're just answering different questions on the original topic? So maybe we're talking past each other, and we got, it's kind of loose, but that's part of the charm. So that's where we're at. But I did want to say, on this note, one of the things that really drives me, I remember talking to my students and I was asking them like what motivates them. And I remember I was like, all right, well, I'll tell you what motivates me. And I just let the answer like flow from my soul. And I was like, you know what motivates me? Anger. That's what gets me up in the morning. I get up in the morning. I want to argue with someone. I want to fight. Someone's going to piss me off. There's this, I think it's XKCD or some kind of comic that it's like, hey, we got to go. What are you doing? And then it's a person furiously typing in a computer and they're like, hold on, somebody is wrong on the internet.
Yeah.
That's me. But it's also, that's what motivates me. Like what got the current thing that I'm on, which is like I'm going to fight against moral realists crusade, is what I perceived as from many moral realists is a smug, dismissive attitude of we got the right view. Moral anti-realists are a bunch of stupid assholes, and we're gonna dunk on them. And when I look at a lot of the arguments that they employ, I see a lot of rhetoric and a lot of dubious framing. That they frame the issues in a way that kind of implies, hey, yeah, those anti-realists over there, they're a bunch of shitheads. And I don't like that because the analytic philosophy is supposed to be this sober dispute between people with different perspectives. It's not supposed to be casting shade on someone with a syllogism. Like you're like, technically, if P then Q, P therefore Q. But really, you're like, hey, if my opponents disagree with me, they're douchebags. They disagree with me, therefore they're douchebags. You're not. This is why I talk about stuff like normative entanglement. So, this is the kind of exchange you'll see from a realist towards an anti-realist. Oh, so you don't think it's objectively wrong to torture babies for fun? And, as I talked about this, like, what is the anti-realist supposed to say? They can't say, yes, it's objectively wrong, because then the realist is going to go, so then you agree with me. They're both realists. High five, right? So I have to say, no, it's not objectively wrong. So the realist is like, oh my God, audience, look at this person. They say it's not objectively wrong to torture babies for fun. Look at that. Look at this shithead. Look at this awful person. What are they implying? Are they implying that the anti-realist is like 3 seconds from torturing a baby for fun?
So it's so
why
interesting.
Are they doing that? Like,
there are two things that strike me about that claim. Is one, I was like, somebody pissed Lance off. It was in one comment you made. I don't know if it was in your comment section or my comment section, but to someone where you basically, I'll paraphrase, and I think this is close to a sentiment you'd say. So I hope if I get it wrong, let me know. Which was basically like, realists talk to me as if there's something fucking wrong with me if I don't accept their conclusion. Like I'm a bad person, or I'm crazy, or something's fucked up if I don't accept the claim that because I value stuff, I ought to value everybody else's stuff. And I could feel that kind of like pissed off or anger in there. And I dig it. I think that there's something interesting and valuable in a very colloquial, loose sense of that term. But I also think I'm glad that I haven't watched a whole lot of philosophy YouTube, because what you described to me sounds like all of the shitty, like natural law, divine command flavored Christian debate shit that people put online. Like, here's where the theist owns the atheist because the atheist can't answer the impossible question. Why is it wrong to murder babies? And then they have some poor sap who was ill prepared to be in the discussion who's like, well, let me tell you, there's this one video that was a short that popped up and I was like, oh my God, I can't even deal with it because it makes me feel so bad for the people. Of the guy was like, well, ultimately, I don't really think, murdering, raping pedophiles are wrong. They're just intersubjectively. And I work with them in prison.
I know the video you're talking about. Yeah,
I'm like, dude, this is what that was going to be. If I were to try to convince Lance of the value of moral realism, that would be my first step. Is you get to avoid being that guy, and you just know you'll never have to deal with that answer in that context. Now, I think you'd probably be a little more savvy than to have your opening be, let me tell you, I'm going to walk right into being the person you just described getting pointed at in the audience, covering their mouth and being like, and you just lost. There's no way you can ever come back. It's sort of before this started, you were talking about, oh yeah, if someone's like, I'm going to start this discussion by talking about my racism, right? Like nothing else I ever say will ever matter after that. And so, so practically my only argument I would make is pragmatically, if you were to commit to realism, you could avoid that. You could avoid in a classroom setting, starting out an ethics class, an intro to ethics class with like, yeah, ultimately when push comes to shove, if I were to give the best version of it, just like I'm a pragmatist with regard to justification, I'll concede to a correspondence theory of truth, but only because I think it's practically efficacious. and it's really probably part of a coherent collection of beliefs that I think I have. So ultimately, the truth value of any of the propositions that I'm ascribing really has more to do with that than ultimate reality. So let's talk about ethics. They'd be like, fuck this. Why would I bother? It's all bullshit. It's all just what you think is kind of right based on whatever. So I think there might be some value in that. That would be a pragmatic argument to someone wanting to hang their hat on the best sort of moral realism they can find. And in that original video, I hope I made it clear. I was using like one of those daily dose of wisdom guys arguments, and it was like a standard moral argument for the existence of God. But he basically given Descartes as a justification for our belief that in objective morals, like, well, it seems so. You just know it. You just know that murder and rape are wrong. Therefore, murder and rape are wrong. Therefore, God exists. Like that sort of Cartesian, it's so clear and distinct to you that morality is objective. It must be objective. And I think I can do better than that. I think I can give you an argument for moral realism or objective moral truth or however you want to, that's way better than that argument. And I think the sort of Kantian account I give is better than that. So if it's better than that, Brandon McGuire he's such a good looking mustached dude. I'm jealous of him. And he has books. That's my next move. People will think I'm smart if I have books in the background.
True.
But I do think like a Kantian account, I would think a whole bunch of consequentialist accounts. I would think desire satisfactionist flavored stuff. There's like a whole bunch of stuff that's going to be better than that argument. So my moral realism, I think I might ultimately end up justifying on pragmatic grounds. I might be willing to do that. Be like, yeah, I'm a realist because I really do. I can't conceive of a world in which injustice is a good thing. And that might just be me. I might be totally wrong about it. So I've probably gerrymandered everything else to fit my view that indiscriminate injustice is horribly wrong. And I want to have the most compelling arguments for it possible.
Yeah. Well, one concern I have, though, is the kind of pragmatic justification that you're describing in the context of that discussion would be it doesn't strike me as a pragmatic reason for endorsing the truth of realism. It strikes me as a reason for saying you're a realist in certain contexts. And so there's a big difference there. If the Inquisition came back and like the Catholic Church was out executing anybody that says they're not a Catholic, I'm a Catholic. I'm totally Catholic. Praise Jesus. I'm a Catholic. I worship God. I got a picture of Mary back over there. 100% Catholic. Don't tell anybody otherwise. So I would say all that, but I wouldn't believe it. And so there might be pragmatic value in pretending to be a realist, but that's a different thing from the pragmatic value of being a realist.
Yeah. And I think part of my wanting to not distinguish between those two is likely having to do with that, the imperfection of our reflective awareness of our own psychological states and who we are and what we're doing and why we're doing it is, I'll say that might be why I'm doing it. It also might be that I genuinely believe it to be totally true. And I think I do probably talk about it a little differently in different contexts. Like it's easy for the sake of my channel because I always couch everything in. I'm trying to give the stuff that's most engaging and compelling. I want to give people stuff to think about. Tomorrow, hopefully, if I can finish them, I'll be doing videos both on Thompson's defense of abortion and Marquis's why abortion's wrong. And I'll sell them both as hard as I can in the videos because I want people to think. But with regard to like the ethical commitment stuff and the meta ethics stuff, to sort of segue in that direction, because I can't see the chat. I think one of those, tying it all the way back to something you were saying about that frustration with regard to seeing how people were wanting to ignore someone's particular expressions of their values or how they were talking about them or what they meant to them and dismiss those. I think your frustration and or wanting whatever discomfort, malcontent, or you just seeing it as wrong of people doing that can be explained really nicely in the sort of quasi pseudo neo-Kantian account that I account for, because those people matter, right? Like they matter. They may not matter to you in the way that would compel you to act in certain ways, but I think we could get to arguing how and why some conception of good or value stems from the existence of persons. And again, it is ethics in general, right? Like it's a practical thing. It's a result of having conscious beings on a planet with 8 billion other people, or however many there are when you're doing it, and wanting to figure that out. And it's not easy. I don't think anybody who has an easy answer to it and thinks that, like, oh yeah, here's how it is every day, I'm just going to go out and do the right thing all the time. Here's your list of rules to follow or your utilitarian calculus to run. That to me just seems like they have a completely different makeup than me and the human beings I've known. So I think the big differences in our view, I think part of the one comment made in the chat that we might be talking past each other sometimes is probably true, that we might be talking about slightly different things. But I do ultimately want to say that there are good reasons to say that all people are deserving to be treated in a certain way. I really believe that to be true. I think we can defend that position.
Yeah, when you defend that position, is that like a normative stance you take, or do you think that all people deserve to be treated a certain way and that is true independent of anybody's goal standards or values? Because that's where I'm going to have the issue. I'm not going to
Yeah.
have an issue if you say, yeah, everybody matters. I agree. They matter to me. But
Yeah.
what I mean by that is consistent
Yeah.
with anti-realism. So
Yeah.
if you mean something different by that, the issue is going to come down to what that difference is. And, I'm going to have a lot of questions about whether that matters. So
Yeah.
I don't think that like people genuinely matter or matter more if they matter in a realist way than if they matter in an anti-realist way, for the same reason that, I have a certain reaction when I eat certain foods. Like, let's say that
Yeah.
pizza with mushrooms. I like mushroom pizza. Now, I think it tastes good. So subjectively, it tastes good. If it turned out it was also stance independently good, it wouldn't taste any better to me. That doesn't make it tastier. And so it's the
Yeah.
same thing where, I happen to care about other people and think that their interests matter. But if they stance independently matter, I don't care about that. That doesn't make any difference to me. And I don't know why it would make any difference to anybody else. So, you know, there's a like kind of an onion of issues that I have with
Right. Yeah.
realism. And at the bottom, it's just that not only do certain forms of realism seem incoherent to me, like I don't even think they make sense. To the
Right.
extent that they make sense, they appear to me to be false. To the extent that they appear to be false, it's because I don't think there's any good arguments for them. But even if I
Right.
get past all of that, and I can try to do my best to say, okay, supposing to the extent that it makes any sense, realism were true, it would be a big old shrug from me. I wouldn't care. And so that's part of what puzzles me so much about realism. Why this is even an issue for people.
Well, and I think that that's it's back to that big challenge, right? Like if there are two huge problems from my point of view for Kant, it's motivating moral action, motivating that caring that you're talking about. How can one be motivated to act? And it's Hume's problem, right? Like, how can one be motivated to act for goodness? How does goodness, if it's not going to inspire some sort of emotion or psychological response, how does that motivate one to do anything or determine anything? And he's asking for a whole lot of work, it seems to be done by out of duty, out of respect, and the internal luminosity of the goodwill, right? Like being a good person in and of itself is going to motivate you to want to be a good person. And I think part of what you were talking about before, which I think makes a lot of sense, is nobody's doing that. Nobody in their day-to-day life is doing that. Your goals are your goals. The things I want are what I want. They're not things that I've decided will be good and valuable to me as Lance, trying to become a good person, motivated by my aspiration to reflect a goodwill or enact a goodwill in the world. And that makes sense to me. But the part that in doing this kind of abstract stuff away from everyday moral decision making is to say, what are the criteria and standards and things we can say that are true or false about what one could or might or ought to do, obviously. And I don't think it's that tied to real world, everyday application in terms of like moral decision making in the moment. And the closest I can ever get, the sort of analytic, sort of thought experiment sorts of examples. Oh God, I forgot the name of it. Someone in chat will tell you. Something numerophobia. Like if I have a fear of odd numbers, right? Like a profound fear of odd numbers. So emotionally, I'm invested in avoiding odd numbers at all cost. So emotionally and psychologically, I don't want to see the number 5 show up if you write on the board 2 + 3 equals ? I think in spite of that profound, subjective, personal, emotional stance, I can still recognize and be motivated to say, oh shit, the right answer there is 5. I don't want it to be, I hate it, but I think there's something there that's akin to Kant's conception of how and why a moral truth could seem to be moral truth, even if I don't want it to be, or even if I don't like it, or even if it doesn't make any of my current or conscious experiences better in the moment. And the phobia probably is an exaggerated version of just like if 2 + 3 is written on the board. I don't think I have some investment. I don't have it the same way you're talking about moral claims not really impacting the way you were going to live your life or right and wrong or making your right and wrong stronger or whatever. My emotional state isn't, I don't think I have any sort of emotional state with regard to how or why consciously aware. I walk into a classroom and 2 + 2 is written on the chalkboard, dating myself, on the dry erase board or on the smart board.
Hey, I used a chalkboard today. They're still
Nice.
in.
Chalkboards are rad. I love them, except I'm allergic and I end up coughing and sneezing. I think I'm going to write 4. I'm going to see 2 + 2 equals, and I'm going to say 4, and it doesn't have anything to do with my goals or desires or whatever else. I'm not like thinking, ooh, I want to be the smart kid in class, or ooh, this is going to make it easier for me to get change at the grocery store, or ooh, it's just like become, maybe in a Humean sense, like customary or habitual. And I think the same thing can be true of a statement like, hey, treat everybody with dignity and respect. I see that. I don't see that as necessarily being like, well, only treat people with dignity and respect. Assign that a truth value if and only if treating them with respect is going to advance my particular goals or my particular wants or my particular desires. I can see an explanation of it couched in wanting to avoid what you were talking about. Because when you were saying, hey, people are dismissing the anti-realist as being stupid or dumb or shitty or whatever. No, let me respect them. Let me respect Lance, the anti-realist, not as someone to be dunked on, not as someone to be used for my own goals, but I think his point of view matters. And so both intellectually or theoretically, I want to consider those views, and morally, I want to give them the same consideration. And then also, if you really want to get loco into it, I think linguistic meanings work very much the same way as well. Something that when you were talking about meanings, I really think there's something, it's probably been written in the last 20 years and I haven't read it. And someone's going to chime in that first Korsgaard book. They both came out about the same time. She used an example about like a private language argument and private meaning and private reasons. That's a really cool argument of how and why. And I think this is right. Morality wouldn't make sense in a universe with one person in it, right? One conscious being. There are no obligations. Do whatever the fuck you want. Wittgenstein's private language argument, which I'm sure people are familiar with, or some people are familiar with. The short version of it that isn't complete at all is the example he gives of like, you have a pain in your foot and you name it, but gradually over time it migrates and moves, but you're still calling the pain, referring to it with the same name. There's no way for you to get the meaning wrong, right? You mean what you mean, you know where the pain is, you know what you're talking about, but it's hard to say that there's an effective use of linguistic meaning because there's nothing public, there's no way to get it wrong. That reminded me of Wittgenstein. In the Tractatus, he only talks about life, but in the Investigations and later stuff, he talks about a form of life. And he thinks a commonality is required in order, a commonality of form of life is required for linguistic meaning to get off the ground. And he gives the example of like asking for blocks or whatever else. And I think that conception of linguistic meaning and that form of life and our participating in meaning is similar to a shared form of life with regard to a shared valuing of ourselves when we're talking about personhood and personhood being valuable or persons being a means to the good, such that we can't shirk it. I don't think we can ignore it very cleanly or clearly or with any pragmatic effect. I don't think we can say other people. Let me see. I don't think one can say other people. It's okay to treat other people with no dignity or no respect. It's okay for me to treat other people as things. It's okay for me to treat other conscious beings as just objects or things. I think that's for me to exist in the world as a conscious being. I'm committed to something false. And we could cash out what theory of truth you wanted to do that by. If I'm doing that, if I'm failing to treat people with dignity and respect, I'm failing to recognize a fact about the world that we could create truth valuable propositions about.
Yeah, this is just so puzzling to me because
Yeah.
I don't think that how you treat other people has any it's completely orthogonal to what you think is true. So, I think you could just have only true beliefs and then just go around mutilating people for fun. Like there wouldn't be facts you're incorrect about. Because like, if you said, well, these people
Yeah.
matter,
Yeah.
I'm going to have questions about what that means because if I'm acting and I'm going around like torturing people for fun or whatever, what I'm trying to do is achieve my goals. And so,
Yeah.
I am achieving my goals. So what am I factually mistaken about? And so maybe that's what I'd pose to you. Like, let's say there was a person that's going
Yeah.
around torturing people for fun. What fact, like they're factually incorrect? Like is it that they have beliefs that are false?
Well, I think that's why I threw in there, like, it depends on what the kind of account of truth you want to go with. Pragmatically, I think like the whole project of ethics or metaethics, I think starts from, hey, here's this problem we have of having a whole bunch of people with a whole bunch of different points of view and a whole bunch of different very much stance dependent wants, needs, goals, desires, whatever else. And we got to figure it out. This is where we're jumping like from meta-ethical to ethical or whatever else. I think fictional Lance, because I think dance. I got to do my philosophical heckin' convention and come up with a word that rhymes with you so people know I'm not talking about you mutilating people. But mean world Lance, who's out there mutilating people for fun. If you're failing to recognize, there's a bunch of different mistakes you could be making, depending on what kind of account of truth you want to cash it out with. If it's a pragmatic account, it's like, that's a shitty way to go through the world because it's not going to work out for you, right? Like we can just go to just straight like refutation of egos. And this is why when I've said like, I might be doing what you advocated for is I'm going to jump around from realist to not realist, depending on the audience. And that might be the way to do it is I would want to say, and it's why Kant, or I, at least the version of Kant I always say, act as if other people are, ends in and of themselves. It's not you have to know for certain they are. Act as if they are. And I think the reasons for that are if you're seeing them, I think for a human being to do that, if you were to go out and actually mutilate people, do you think you could possibly do that while recognizing that they are persons with hopes, wants, needs, desires, goals, values, feelings, thoughts, they play a role in a whole bunch of other people's lives. And with your psychology background's much deeper than mine, is that what happens when people do that? People who are capable of doing that, are they out there like, yes, I'm taking all of those facts seriously. I'm recognizing, because those are all just facts, and I'm proceeding to chop people up, and then I feel good about it. And then I'm like, fuck yeah, let's roll. I don't think that
Yeah,
happens.
I don't do clinical psychology, so I'm not going to be able
Yeah.
to tell you much about various types of psychopathologies. So that's not something I would be a specialist in.
Well, no, but like
No
you had to take a
training
couple
therapy.
intro classes, right? I mean, that seems like intro level. People
You would be
aren't out
surprised.
there
I have
doing
never
that.
taken a course on mental illness or abnormal psychology. It wasn't a requirement.
I would have thought that would have been required like
Not a
first
requirement.
years,
Nope.
and everybody would have gravitated to that and psychology of sex. I feel like everybody registers for that class too.
Yeah, didn't take
Of
either of
course.
those courses. So
He's like,
no,
not
took a lot
me.
of courses, wasn't those.
I was taking classes in crystal skulls, you dumbass. Slap.
Yeah. No, my views are already changing by that point. So, I mean, one, there's a question of whether humans are like that, but there's also a question like we don't need humans. We could encounter like
Yeah,
an alien species that wants to eat
sure.
humans or something. Uh, yeah, I don't think there's any logical inconsistency, and I think that's all I really need in a being not only recognizing that people have wants and needs and desires when it goes around torturing them, but actually that being a motivator. Like it doesn't want to torture a table or a chair because they don't really suffer, and it might not even
Yeah,
want to torture like bugs because they don't suffer enough. It's
yeah,
specifically when it's torturing people, like just imagine the perfect sadist. So,
yeah, yeah,
like, it's going to want to capture the person that has the most connections, the
yeah,
most people love this person. They suffer the most. And it's like,
yeah,
yeah, that's what I want. I like the suffering. I don't see
yeah.
any logical inconsistency about being that sadistic. Now, I have to add this qualifier. I'm not saying that I'm like this. A lot of times when you say, I don't think there's a logical inconsistency with being a sadist, I'm not saying I'm endorsing like it,
It's a good thing.
I don't have a lovey-dovey, everybody sit in the drum circle view. If there's a
Right.
being like that, I take them out. Like I don't want them to exist because that's a very scary, dangerous being. Uh, but I just don't think they're making factual mistakes. I just think they have, relative to my and your preferences, a very unfortunate dispositional profile that makes them very dangerous to me. But yeah, I don't see any reason psychologically why a being couldn't want to torture people because it recognizes their personhood and their agency and their values. And I don't know what factual mistakes that it would be getting wrong.
And I think the factual mistakes that I'd try to cash out if I was really wanting to like become an ethicist or go into research or something would be that they are violating criteria that are just necessary for coexisting with people, whether or not we're merely communicating with them or having any meaningful interaction, whether it's linguistic meaning or any other way someone wants to cash out meaning. And since we're all doing that, you're violating principles or rules that are required for that to uh, take place. So that's the inconsistency. It's sort of
So
like,
what exactly is the inconsistency?
well, I guess the best, I was trying to explain this to someone the other day and I realized I'm not doing a very good job of it. So maybe you can help me. Is I like to use the if we think of like any kind of a naturalized account of meaning, linguistic meaning after after Wittgenstein, like maybe I don't know who you're familiar with. You're probably more contemporary people, like maybe Quine or like Quine's Gavagai stuff. Does that like word and object? Any ring any bells? Sort of makes sense. The Gavagai example, right? Like, hey, the problem of radical translation, and I think he's right about this. I can't be certain if you and I are pointing to the rabbit and you're saying Gavagai and I'm saying Gavagai, I can't be certain that we have the same mental representation in mind or we have the same stuff in mind. All I can be sure of, and this was the part that I have trouble explaining, we can be sure that our ideas or speaker intended meanings don't completely contradict. That we can be sure of. If they did, we wouldn't be able to communicate. Does that make sense?
Yep.
And so to me, we're embracing and accepting those are rules of the game just by showing up and participating in meaningful speech acts, right?
Okay, but this could be true of you and me. But if like a cosmic space devourer shows up and starts eating
Yeah.
people, Like, it's not trying to have conversations with us. We could all be trying
Yeah.
to talk to it, and
Well, and
it
that's
just
where,
doesn't answer, and it just keeps munching. I don't know that I don't think it's getting any facts wrong.
well, and I think the space monster is munching, depending whether or not I'd want to praise or blame it for munching down on us, um, would have to do with whether or not it had the psychological capacities that could demonstrate the same sort of ruled, governed participation in living beingness that's required for linguistic meaning. And one of the things that, I mean, this is something that's kind of, I'm riffing off of Korsgaard in a big way, is that notion. I really think that there's something common about the form of life of creatures who value anything at all, such that they're recognizing implicitly or explicitly by participating in these rules of the game. I'm demonstrating that I think people are valuable by pursuing my own goals. And that's the sort of example that I think gets at our disagreement, is the idea that that I'm validating or recognizing the value of myself as a person, independent of my subjective wants, needs, desires, and goals, when I act in the world at all. I mean, if
Yeah,
there,
so I don't think that. I
you
just think
don't
I
see that.
value things. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't think, well, I'm certainly not explicitly committed to that, but I also don't think I'm implicitly committed to that. Yeah, I don't think that. I in fact, I'm not even sure what it would mean for, like, I don't know what you have in mind when you say that people whatever it is valuable. Because
Yeah, yeah,
I see valuing as something like uh a disposition that I have where I'm motivated to act so as to achieve a certain goal. And so
yeah.
to me, it doesn't make sense to describe people as valuable in that respect. And I worry that if we cash out what's meant by valuable and it means something like has a bunch of non-value properties that are capable of being valued. One point I would make about that is, well, then everything is trivially valuable because anything could be valued by any possible agent. Take a, dark matter. There could be an entity that just loves to look at dark matter and that's all it wants to do. Okay, so then dark matter is valuable. Okay, take
Yeah.
a broken a broken like a broken pencil laying on the ground somewhere. Well, someone might collect broken pencils. They might like to keep them.
No,
Or like
and
chewed
so here,
gum. Someone might
and
want to
here's,
collect all the chewed gum under a desk. Maybe they love
this is
that. So
where
chewed gum is
it
valuable.
it's a perfect. This is a really great question. I'm glad it got to it. People are like, finally, you jackass, take off your orange hoodie and talk about this stuff. That's the sort of example that illustrates, I don't think if you know of someone who came up with a perfect ethical account, meta ethical account, whether it's realist or not, that doesn't have any weaknesses, I'd love to see it. I don't think it exists, but that's the whole point of doing this, is right. Like, we cash out those weaknesses. I am perfectly happy to live with the idea that when we're talking about things, whether we want to talk about them as being valuable or good in some sense, in terms of objects in the world, I have no problem living with the fact that a whole bunch of stuff that most people don't think of as valuable might be. I can live with that consequence of the view that, oh my gosh, so you're saying the rock outside that no one knows about currently, but could be used as a weapon to prevent someone from mutilating everybody they see, or could be the rock that Will Smith's going to throw into the UFO to save us all from the space aliens that come down and munch us. I'll be like, yeah, I'm fine with that. I'm okay with living with that. That's not a problem for me. I don't think it's currently being valued. And I don't think anybody has to like revere it or create rules or regulations preventing people from using it in certain ways. But I think the sort of example I'd use is, and this is a tough example for me. I think someone's doing something wrong if I had a piece of sheet music that you or someone in the chat would love. Like, it's going to be your favorite piece of sheet music, but you don't even know it exists yet. I think I'm doing something a little shitty by destroying it. Would I ever want to come up with a list of rules or laws saying that I couldn't destroy it? Probably not. But I think you're doing something wrong. I think you're doing something shitty. How shitty and how we would want to create rules about it, that would be a whole nother question. But it gets to ethics being and metaethics being this attempt to address these challenges that arise from a bunch of conscious beings with a bunch of different subjective preferences, with a bunch of different goals and intentions. How do we navigate that as the sorts of creatures we are? And to me, it's why I think someone mentioned it in my comments the other day. It's like, I came to this stuff, I really think, from Rawls. Like, that makes sense to me. And it could be like a Rawlsian sort of veil of ignorance sort of thing, original position deal, could be justified in terms of self-interest, right? Like, hey, you don't know who you're going to be.
Mhm.
So it works out as like roll of the dice. It's in your best interest to have rules that benefit everybody. But I feel like there's something about, like, if I write it on the chalkboard and I say, hey, Lance, here's the deal. There's person 1, 2, 3, and 4. They all want stuff. They're all just like you and me in that they want stuff. Not just because there's the risk that it could turn out bad or good for you. Don't you think there's something to be said about that those people should stand in relation to their goals such that the world's better if they can achieve them? And it ties into, and there's something about them as creatures having the sorts of goals, having the ability to pursue them, having the ability to reflect on them, and having the ability to christen them good ones, that makes it such that it's objectively a better world when they get to maximize that pursuit. And it was something that people picked on a little bit, which I understand because I wasn't clear. When I say a rationally justifiable goal, the only limit on the rationality will be it's not violating another person or the person in and of themselves. So when I say, ooh, a rationally justifiable goal, I'm saying I don't think it's rationally justifiable to want to mutilate other people, because I believe if I'm going to say I matter enough to go out and pursue mutilating other people, then I'm saying anybody could, because I know my subjective wants, needs, and desires, those can change. I know I can be wrong about them. I have really imperfect reflective awareness. If I want to be right, and I think we do, about right and wrong, I got to say people ought to do what fulfills them, makes them feel good, as long as they're not fucking with other people or violating themselves or others. And you can see why I'd be like, yeah, I could live with a certain flavor of rule consequentialism. I could live with a certain sort of emotivism. So that, I guess those are the wrongs that I see. I think that the big, if people want analytic sorts of examples, I do think when someone walks into a room and says 2 + 2, there's something that compels them in some way, some psychological something that isn't a subjective want, need, or desire to recognize that 4 is the answer. If they know what the symbols mean and what 2 and 2 equal. I also think if someone's going to recognize the facts of the world, that's them amongst a gazillion other people, all of whom have wants, needs, and desires, that if they find themselves to be important because of their having desires and wanting to pursue desires, and we say they demonstrate an understanding of that importance by acting on their desires, then everybody is important in that same way. That's
I get off the train on the latter point. Can you let me take a very quick break, and then I have more to say when I get back?
Yeah.
I just need a couple minutes. All right.
I can tell people my joke.
Yeah, tell them your joke. I'll be right back in a minute.
All right, this is going to kill them. This slays. No, it doesn't really. I'll tell you the backstory for this is I started by doing like really shitty philosophy TikToks because I knew I wanted to do philosophy stuff. And I have a daughter who is, if you watch any of my videos and you see me making like jokes in brain rot, it's because they're little nods to her. So I'll work in like a joke about talking to the chat or something. But she told me that if I told a stupid dad joke, it would get more views than any of like my really well thought out philosophical shit. And of course she was absolutely right. So the joke I came up with, which is, I think is awesome and hilarious. There's a series of them, but the first one is, what do a bunch of 12-year-old boy snails say when they nail a bottle flip? And I can't see the chat, so I can't tell anybody's answer. But my answer was, "Let's cargo." high comedy right there. It's probably good that I can't see the chat because I feel like I'm talking to myself and I won't see if you are absolutely offended. So I have a whole series of escargot jokes. When my friend Pierre, who ran a shipping company and drove a cargo ship, was sinking, his last words were less cargo. See, snailed it. That was when I came up with that joke. Everybody said snailed it. And I was like, fuck, that's a better punchline than mine. So go away for being better and smarter and funnier than mine. I got a whole bunch of less cargo. Like what did the snail say when he saw Elon Musk driving by? Ooh, escargot. See, I can do them all. Dying of creative. That's good. See, I'm okay being the one being embarrassed. Someone in there knows psychologically or just took a class on this and can explain. I don't mind being embarrassed. I would much rather be embarrassed or punched in the face than see someone be embarrassed or see someone get punched in the face. I don't know if that makes me bonkers or something. And I guess it depends on who's doing the punching too.
Yeah. It's going to depend on a lot of factors. Okay. Actually, of course, it waits till I get back to freeze. Yeah, I like a joke.
Hopefully, it was frozen during my bad jokes.
Yeah, so I love bad jokes. I intentionally hit my wife with dad jokes all the time.
Yeah.
And what I find strange about it is, I'll go through 7 or 8 dad jokes. I invent one or two here or there. They're usually pretty terrible. I can never predict. I'm like, ooh, this is a good dad joke. And then other ones, I'm like, oh, this is a really lame one. There is zero correlation between what I think is a good or bad dad joke and what she actually laughs at. Like, it'll be the dumbest random joke that she'll be like, that one's good. And I'm like, why? And there's just no explanation. It doesn't make any sense.
Well, if we can't explain why things are funny, I think the ethics of humor, that's a discussion to have too. That's a tricky one.
That's a whole other discussion, but I want to stay focused.
Yeah, I know. I was saying for another time. So focus.
I'm still unclear on what, so if I go around the world and I just have my goals and interests and I act on them, it just could so happen, not me, but we can imagine a person that just doesn't care about other people's goals and interests. And it's still just unclear to me how they could be making a mistake or why they would be committed to caring about other people. Like, it just doesn't seem to me that if I value myself and my interests, this has anything to do with why I would be rationally or logically obliged to care about other people's goals and interests. I've gone through this attempt to grok why that would be, and I just don't get it.
Well, so for me, I guess the two things would be, one, I think implicitly to a whole lot of this, and it might be the moral realist snootery that you were talking about, is this implicit assumption that, hey, we want to figure this stuff out, right? Like, we are in the state that we are in, that we are conscious beings of certain cognitive abilities who have wants and needs and desires. And there's more than one of us on the planet. So they might take it as you rejecting their view as like, you don't care about other people, you monster. Right. And to me, I guess I've been thinking about it a little bit, like in the shower or on a walk or on a run, about your concern about not, I guess, feeling or recognizing or being compelled by some sort of normative force or something. If that even makes sense, that's really loose language. So tell me if I'm doing something super stupid. And I was thinking, like, I don't think I have no desire to try to convince Lance or something, or tell him he's wrong, I'm right, or I'm wrong, he's right, which is probably going to be the case. But the best I could do is say, approach it like knowing that you have those pragmatic leanings, is I do think the example you gave of the gold nugget sort of thing, of it having certain properties. And I was lauding you for using the gold nugget, not because I thought it was something original, but that you were willing in the YouTube debate world or YouTube philosophy. People don't ever consider counterexamples unless it's given to them. It's like, I'm not going to give the opponent some nugget of, there's a pun, of something they could possibly use. But I think that that's the closest I could get, is saying, if you're by acting in the world, you're recognizing and treating yourself as if you're valuable. And I think it gets back to that, me saying something has properties that make it good or valuable, that I know that I said I would be happy to live with, like the sheet music is
Yeah,
valuable.
can I say something here
Yeah,
though? Okay,
yeah,
so part of so I when I brought up like, hey, you would be you might be obliged on this
yeah,
view of things being valuable to think
yeah,
everything is valuable. I don't take that to be a reductio or to show the position
yeah,
is wrong. So I'm
yeah,
not thinking something like, hey, I don't think everything is valuable. Your view entails that it would be valuable. Therefore your view is wrong. Like I'm not trying to pull some like modus tollens or something
oh, no,
where
no, no.
uh I'm not that's not the suggestion.
Yeah,
The issue is that once we appreciate that if by valuable what you mean is a kind of descriptive fact, like it is the sort of thing that could in principle be valued.
yes,
And okay, so one implication is everything is valuable in that case, in that sense, because everything could be valued.
yeah,
Okay, so we have that, but then it's now uh now we have this issue, which is that I can recognize everyone else is valuable, where that's taken to mean they're capable of being valued. But it does not follow that merely because everyone is capable of being valued, that I in fact value them or that I ought to value them. And that's where I really have an issue here. Sure, okay, so everyone is valuable and I don't
yeah,
value them. And that might seem like some kind of logical contradiction or mistake. It kind of be like saying, all of these objects are gold,
right.
but I don't consider them gold.
Yeah,
That would be a contradiction because when I say these objects are gold, I'm saying I regard them as gold. It is true that they are gold.
yeah,
And then if I said I don't value them, the analog would be, but I
yeah,
don't consider them gold. That would be a bit like saying all of these objects are gold and I don't believe that they're gold. Where if we understand these objects are gold to imply I believe that they're gold,
yeah,
like we could say I believe these objects are gold and these objects are gold, are they're identical.
yeah,
Then you would have a contradiction. You would have me saying I believe these objects are gold and I
yeah,
believe these objects are not gold. Contradiction, I'm in trouble. But when it comes to
yeah,
saying, I believe these people are valuable and I do not value these people, I'm not seeing a contradiction there. Because when we cash out the
yeah,
meaning of valuable and value, it would be something like this. I believe these people are potentially capable of being valued, and I do not value them. And that's not a contradiction. And so I'm still not seeing the contradiction.
well, and so that's so awesome and helpful, and, because to me, by acting in the world at all, that to me is a demonstration, an act of you recognizing the value of those psychological characteristics in yourself that lead to your ability to value. So the important connection in the argument I'm making is when I say the water could be valuable to put out a fire or to quench your thirst, and it's valuable or it has some quality of goodness that could potentially be used by you to put out a fire. You've never put out a fire before with it, but the fire comes and you dump the water on it, and I say, hey, that was a property of the water, putting out fires. That was good for you. Um, the thing that's important for my argument to get off the ground that is valuable or potentially valuable or has properties that lead to value is your personhood. That's the thing that's required, is that because of this whatever combo platter of psychological characteristics fuel your subjective particular desires, your particular goals, your ability to satisfy those goals, your ability to value the satisfaction of the goals or the actions that lead to it, or the propositions that reflect pursuit of the good, however you want to cash it out. Those are the only things that would be really hinging on saying lead to that contradiction. And it's saying that by acting on my desire, you want to, I don't know, you were going to torture people or whatever. By acting on my desire, I'm saying it's a necessary and sufficient condition of me finding value in torturing people, if I can find value in torturing people, such that I'm a person. So if I value anything at all, then my personhood is valuable as personhood, and my subjective preferences are, the particulars of them are irrelevant, I would argue, because I'm going to need those faculties that allow me to value anything, no matter what they are. Whether I want to be tortured, torture someone, or avoid torture altogether. Therefore, the value, ability, or the good, or the intrinsic, whatever it is, however you want to cash it out, of personhood exists stance independent, because any stance I have for me to find satisfaction, value, achieve a goal, the argument is persons are necessary and sufficient for that. Therefore, persons are valuable regardless of your subjective desires. Therefore, you're contradicting yourself if you're saying personhood in me is valuable and worthy. Personhood in me expresses something of value when I pursue my desires, but it isn't when someone else does.
Yeah, I don't think I'm committed to that. So I'm
Yeah.
not seeing a contradiction here.
Yeah.
Because we would have to unpack a lot of what you
Yeah.
mean. So like a few things. One is, I think if we really want to get to the bottom of this, I would need to see some type of syllogism or formalization.
Yeah.
I'm really worried that there's inadvertent. I'm not saying I feel like you're using the terms value and valuable in ways where some type of unintentional equivocation may be occurring, where the
Oh,
meanings of
totally.
the terms is shifting and
I'm sure
changing.
that's true.
So, if I act in my interests and against the interests of somebody else, there's no facts I'm denying about the person. I don't have to deny that they are a person. I could say, yeah, they're a person, and I don't care about their personhood. Like, for instance, even if my personhood is necessary for me to pursue my values, someone else's personhood is necessary for them to pursue their values. I can grant that they're both valuable, but again, if valuable means the sort of thing that one could value, I am not thereby obligated to value. Like, all the things that are valuable, I don't. Damn, freezing at me. All the things that are valuable in the world, I don't have to value them. Like, it's not that because something is valuable, therefore I must value it. Lots of I don't know, just something somebody else likes, like Taylor Swift music. I don't particularly like it. It's valuable to a Taylor Swift fan, not valuable to me. An autograph from a famous person that I don't care about. It's valuable to somebody else, not valuable to me. Another person's personhood, just because they value their personhood, doesn't mean I have to value their personhood. That's where I'm still getting off the train, because part of the issue here is just that I'm not valuing my personhood in virtue of it being personhood, such that if someone else has personhood, I would consider them both valuable. I would only, to the extent that I value my personhood, value it because it allows me to achieve my goals. So there's an important difference here. My personhood allows me to achieve my goals. Your personhood doesn't. And so, a cup of water in my hand actually has different value to me than a cup of water in your hand. My cup of water can quench my thirst. Your cup of water can't quench my thirst, assuming that it's like inaccessible to me. Your personhood is not accessible to me. I can't use it directly to achieve my goals. So the attempt to try to commensurate the two and say this one's valuable, so this one has to be valuable. If by valuable we mean they're capable of being valued, it's trivially true that they're both valuable. But the fact that I value one doesn't require me to value the other just because they're both necessary for the respective agents that possess them. There's a relevant difference there. And so it seems to me that there's a kind of like a symmetry breaker here, which is that my personhood is valuable. My personhood is accessible and usable to me. It has instrumental use to me in a way that other people's personhood does not. And there does seem to me like there's a difference here. And that seems to me to account for the difference in the fact that I value one more than the other.
And that, I think it gets back to something that I've said a few times to a few different people is, and it may be real, it's why I wouldn't want to try to convince you, if given the equivocation that is unintentional, and in a way it's probably intentional vagary on my part, because I don't know exactly how I want to nail it down or what would nail it down, that leads to the equivocation. So I'm not trying to be tricky about it. I'm just being honest and saying I have a vague conception of it. But if you're going to fail to, if one's going to completely reject the idea that they could be motivated or compelled or willing to recognize the truth or falsehood of a claim, regardless of how it impacted them with regard to their wants, needs, desires, or subjective stance, then there's no hope, right? Like there's no way, right? Like the whole linchpin, one of the linchpins for Kant, the two linchpins that are the weaknesses are free will and that notion that someone's motivated to accept the truth of something like this, right? Like I'm motivated by the goodwill to be a good person, not by my wants or needs or desires. I'm just recognize it out of respect. And if you were, because it's the same argument I think you'd made if I said, well, yeah, go in there and you see on the chalkboard 2 + 2 equals. And you might say, yeah, I could put 7 if I was feeling like it, or 23 if it's not going to impact anybody else. If it's not going to get in the way of my wants, needs, goals, or desires, then there's no wrong answer. If it says 2 + 2 equals on the chalkboard, it's whatever the fuck I want because it's just me. That serves a purpose. The math on the board serves a purpose for me. And if today I like the shape of a 9, great. And I mean, I can't get around that, right? Like I don't
Yeah,
know that anybody
I could
could.
just tell you, I do in fact see math that way. I see math as a tool that's
Yeah,
constructed by people that serves our purposes. I mean,
yeah,
if you want to put it in slogan form, I'd say math is our bitch. Like it does,
yeah,
it serves us.
yeah,
And that's how. So you have people like more rationalistically inclined philosophers that approach math as like there's these a priori mathematical
yeah,
truths.
sure,
Too bad if you don't like them. True is true is true. Whereas I see maths as different possible rules, like systems of rules.
sure.
And they happen to be ones that we apply to making predictions, descriptions, and doing various types of work. They are internally coherent systems of rules, or you try to get internal coherence that happen to be really, really useful for doing stuff in the world. And so, I don't think, in some crude way, if it's useful, it's true. Rather, I think that the way in which math arose is that it arose to solve problems, satisfy certain curiosities, and do
Right.
certain sorts of things. And that in virtue of its role in doing those things, that man, this freezing, it's gonna drive me nuts. In virtue of it serving those purposes, that's how it acquired this, like the pragmatic status of truth, like
Right.
of a pragmatic truth. And this does create a lot of potential disconnect between myself and other people that are not pragmatists about truth. Here's the
Right.
thing, though, about pragmatist approaches. To
Yeah.
a certain extent, I actually think it's not like I just think, yeah, I have a weird view of truth. Everybody else has a different view of truth. Uh, because the pragmatist is not just saying, hey, here's this idiosyncratic view of truth. The
Yeah.
pragmatist is often offering a sort of historical account of how and why people come to regard things as true. And I actually do think science arose, math arose, religion arose, and our general beliefs arose for these various problem-solving everyday purposes that we've internalized and brought into our lives. And that they're, in a certain sense, I actually think many people operate like pragmatists. So I actually think pragmatism does a better job of capturing how people are ordinarily disposed to think, speak, and act than other sorts of views. I don't actually know in practice, though, how much that ends up creating unclosable gaps between my views and other people's views. It certainly
Well,
does for some people, but I don't know if it does for us. It sounds like you're willing to play pragmatic ball.
oh yeah, I
Most
would.
people I think I
Well,
would talk to
because
would not be.
for me, I would say to carry that example of the 2 + 2 equals in the empty classroom, I think I say go for it. I don't care if you're answering 73 to 2 + 2 equals if you're alone in the classroom. But on pragmatic grounds, as soon as someone else enters the classroom, if you're going to insist on it's still 7 because I like the way it looks, that's no longer going to be pragmatically true because it's not going to work out. If you have any goals, wants, needs, desires that you're going to try to pursue in a world full of other people with wants, needs, goals, and desires, the practicality of saying math's my bitch subjectively contingent upon my personal immediate short-term subjective goals is it's quickly going to be saying, practically speaking, 2 + 2 = 4, right? Like it's why I said earlier, right? Like you could adopt like a disquotational theory of truth or anything. The answers to the questions are going to be the same. Is a cat a mammal? True under all concept, right? Like we're all going to stay true to that and all the obvious stuff. And so to extend the analogy of 2 + 2 on the chalkboard, that becomes pragmatically efficacious for you to say 4 every fucking time, treating it as if it's objectively true, treating it as if it's real that 2 + 2 = 4 and never getting it wrong because it's going to work. It's back to, I don't know if it, James gives that cow path example in his explanation of truth. You know what I'm talking about? Pragmatic account of truth. He says, like you're lost in the woods and you come across a cow track, right? And you know cows are domesticated animals. So you say, there is a house at the end of this path. Why? Because it motivates you to walk down the path and you want to get unlost. And that statement for him is true until you get to the end of the path and there's no house there. And it becomes false. And so along with this pragmatic conception of truth, I think, is this notion that, oh shit, pragmatically speaking, I have to recognize that my values, my goals, and I exist in a world of other people. And I think that that's, if and where we were to find something that I might have hope of convincing you was a contradiction, the contradiction only happens once you enter that game. God, and now it's another Wittgenstein reference. Is the same way 2 + 2 = 4. You act as if it's real and true every single time. As soon as there are other people in the room or you have a math test, I say, you damn sure better act as if all people are just as valuable as you are intrinsically. And then like prima facie we'll say that, and then we can go off on it.
Yeah, I'm still going to disagree even in this context because, this is a common thing that happens with when I argue with realists, and typically I'm arguing with like robust, non-naturalist, moral realists. I don't think, so in the case of numbers, I don't think I'm acting as if they're objectively real because I think acting as if they're constructions, so like social constructions, and as if they're objectively real are practically identical. And, for a pragmatist, that, one of the main things that's behind pragmatism is a means or a method of resolving metaphysical disputes where you ask a question, which is, okay, conditional on this view or that view being true, what would be the difference? What would be the practical difference? And if there is none, the dispute is a waste of time. And this is what is a large part of what's at the heart of my disagreement with realists, which is that if there were stance-independent moral facts, it would not make any difference. And so I'm not going to be a realist on pragmatic grounds because I don't think it would matter whether realism is true because I act in accord with my goals and values. And so the kind of dilemma that I pose to realists is something like this. Okay, let's suppose that there are moral facts that are true independent of my goal standards or values. Well, since all of my voluntary action, it always stems from what is in pursuit of my goals and values, there's a couple possibilities. One, the stance-independent moral facts are identical to what I'm already motivated to do. If that's the case, they're motivationally or practically superfluous. They make no difference. They don't do anything. In other words, I would have done this stuff anyway in 100% of cases. If they differ in any way, I won't, and in fact, can't comply with those facts. And so again, they're practically inefficacious. And so the kind of dilemma I'm posing is that if we say, okay, imagine moral realism is true, what difference would it make? I think the answer is absolutely none whatsoever. Would not make a difference. And so when you say, when it comes to math or any domain in which we're saying there's right, wrong answers, true and false, this goes all the way up to everything. When it comes to normative considerations, I think the normative considerations can be entirely extracted from our judgments about what would be practically relevant, and you get the exact same thing. They never make a difference. And so what's really at heart and what I'm rejecting in moral realism is this idea of irreducible normativity. The idea that there are shoulds and shouldn'ts, goods and bads, rights and wrongs, obligations and prohibitions that are not connected to my goals and values in some way. Because if you say, okay, they're not dependent on your goals, but they happen by extraordinary, like by a miracle, they're aligned with him, well, then I would have done them anyway. I would have done those things anyway. They're superfluous. If they're not, then I'm not going to comply with them. And in fact, I think I literally could not comply with them. And so on pragmatic grounds, I think pragmatism only serves to further reinforce the case for anti-realism. And that case is very simple. When you do the pragmatic test, kind of like the squirrel scenario that James describes at the beginning of his lectures on pragmatism, you ask the question, like, with this perspective or that perspective, what would be the difference? There wouldn't be one. And so this is another case where I actually think there wouldn't be a difference if realism were true. I don't think realism achieves anything. It doesn't amount to anything. It doesn't matter. And I think that's where a lot of the argumentative work I'm tasked with engaging in, that's a lot of the burden I have, is to show that anti-realist views, like, they terminate in having exactly the same practical outcome as moral realism does. And I think many realists don't accept that. So and again, I'm talking about other realists that I argue with, not you.
Yeah.
Very common thing for realists to presuppose is something like, if you're an anti-realist, you're some type of appraiser relativist, meaning that you think my attitudes and your attitudes fix what's morally right or wrong for each of us to do in a way that we all are obliged to respect. So if you think it's okay to torture babies, I have to think it's okay for you to torture babies. Now, what I see this as is it's just realists imposing aspects of their own realist preconceptions onto anti-realists. They seem to still think that your beliefs or attitudes, like, fix normative rules that then turn back around and are binding on you. So it'd be like if I make an oath to, like, slaughter all the kind and friendly people over there, like an oath to evil, I am now obliged to follow that rule. And if they make an oath to prevent me from doing it, they're obliged to follow that rule. The rules clash. You're an anti-realist. You think it's good for me, and it's good for them to get into that conflict. But the anti-realist is not obliged to think that. All the anti-realist has to do is say, there's just descriptive facts. There's facts about what is the case. And among the facts about what is the case are facts about what people care about. And among those, there are relational facts. There's facts about the way the world is. There's facts about what people care about. And there's facts about what people can do to achieve their goals. And when I look at that and I look at humans, I think humans have a lot of overlap in their goals and interests, and that there are, in a certain sense, stance-independent facts. There's a complication here, which is that there's a sense in which they're stance-dependent and a sense in which they're stance-independent. But basically speaking, I don't think, like, facts about how to, like, facts about, like, which medications work or not, they're not directly a matter of preference. It's not like if I prefer that aspirin cures cancer, that it will cure cancer. That's not how things work. I don't think it's a mere matter of preference. Fundamentally, if you're a pragmatist, there is a perspectival element to all of this. But you know, so I don't think it's all a matter of mere preference, but I do think there's so much overlap in what people do care about that there are going to be a lot of these sorts of coordination facts. There's going to be facts about, you know, how to best construct a society conditional on us all being agents with competing and conflicting and overlapping and mostly shared goals, but some of which conflict with one another. There's going to be facts about how things are going to go best for us if we agree on certain rules, norms, and institutions. And that's going to look, in practice, a hell of a lot like the kinds of normative moral theories that realists are going to tend to favor. And so I think we could, in principle, if we all never brought up meta-ethics and we just talked about like the moral theories that we are favoring, I think we would do fine. I think so. I don't think normative ethics is irrelevant because, you know, you had mentioned like people that care about animals glomming onto utilitarianism. If you look at the early history of utilitarianism, like, you know, Bentham and Mill, I don't remember which one of them, this was not a time where being gay was considered morally acceptable. And yet they're like reasoning through it. They're like, well, I can't come up with any way in which there's disutility. I guess it's okay. And so you could see utilitarianism, historically speaking, had this awesome progressive element to it where it could lead you to go, wait a minute, there's animals matter. Wait a minute, there's no legitimate basis for denying women equal rights. Like, so it actually had those values. So I do think normative ethics can have those sorts of values. I don't think meta-ethics does. I think, you know, and this is why I call myself an anti-realist quietist. Ideally, what I would like is for us to set aside the meta-ethical disputes and get down to the practical business of how to build good societies. And I think you and I would almost certainly agree so much on what a good society looks like. Like, can't we just get to that practice? Like,
Well,
why are
no,
we arguing about this stuff?
that was such an awesome, I enjoyed it, rant. I wrote a couple of things down, and what's something else I really want to call attention to, because I appreciate it so much. I'm writing down things I agree with. Not like, ooh, here's where I'm going to get him. The only thing that, because I agree so much, and I really feel like we can modus ponens, modus tollens it in a way, is, or actually just, I don't even need to go that deep, is when you say, oh, well, I think pragmatism would be indistinguishable, or anti-realism would be indistinguishable from realism. I think you're probably right. If it's a thoughtful, decent, not like, in no way was I thinking you were going to show up and be like, yeah, well, my anti-realism wants me to be able to go out and indiscriminately kill babies or whatever it was, torture people. If they're indistinguishable, then it would seem like, from my point of view, it's like, well, there are some advantages, some practical advantages. If the conclusions that are going to be drawn are indistinguishable, I get to avoid all of the fights with realists. I get to avoid being all of misleading people in the associations they have with anti-realism, all of those things, even though I'm not really committed to it. In our first conversation, I was like, I'm not sure I'm going to be committed to realism, because what I am committed to is, fuck yeah, that's cool as hell when you look at classical utilitarianism and you bring it up like, oh shit, there's a principle or a wrong we can do to people that has to do with causing suffering. And oh my Lord, it applies to women and men just the same, or it applies to all people. And they are worthwhile in the same way because they experience pleasure and suffering in something as simple like that. That's where the dope shit is, right? Like, I'm like paraphrasing a Dave Chappelle, Kanye West story. Let's just do dope shit, right? Like, and the dope shit when it comes to ethics is there's enough problems trying to figure out, how do we navigate that? How do we navigate being one among many and figuring it out? And like I admitted, I think I came to that through the back door. That's the goal. If there's something missing that the realists that you've been talking to, I suspect I know nothing about any of these positions really anymore, is there's an implicit premise there of, I want to be a good person. I want to have a principle on which I can reflect at the end of the day and say, let's try to make, it sounds hokey, and now I'm the kumbaya drum circle guy, is like, we're on a planet with a whole bunch of people. We got to figure some shit out. How do we best do that? And there probably is some psychological satisfaction for people of saying like, well, I've got the real good. I got the real idea of the good. And Lance, you got the fake idea of good that's just subjective. And tomorrow you're going to tell me you changed your mind and decided to kick puppies and eat babies or whatever it is, right? Like, and that whole, any sort of like weird snobbery or something is gross to me. Like, I'm not going to offer some profound moral or ethical position. I think it is devaluing people. I think it is treating other people as if they're shitty. I think it is using other people. I think it's objectifying people in ways that are bad. And I would offer Kantian principles for that. But the best argument I could give is, if the sort of pragmatic anti-realism that you advocate for is indistinguishable, why not just have realism on your side if you're living in a world where realists are going to be assholes to deal with in some way? I'm not saying they are, but like, doesn't it make it easier to go to that debate in the church where the guy's like, debate over, I win. He said that pedophiles aren't really morally wrong. You got to say, nah, they're really fucking morally wrong. What we really want to focus on here is what rules and laws and how do we want to account for people causing harm and suffering and hurting little kids? What do we want to do about that? The realist questions answered. Because if they are indistinguishable, I only need like one or two things that are going to make your life easier or better, right? For you to embrace it. That's where, if I was really going to try to push, that's where I'd push, not to try to describe some metaphysical thing that like, I don't know how, if you're not compelled by the idea that hey, my personhood period creates value in the world for people, then I don't know, like how I would, other than to say maybe it'll work out better. Maybe it'll work out. And I do think that following rules and approaching them as if they are real is a requirement. That I think is going to be a requirement. What those rules are, let's hash it out. Sorry, my rant wasn't nearly as interesting or as compelling as yours, but I think it's also interesting because watching I only watched little bits of the videos, and I'll confess, of your videos you'd sent me with someone Brown maybe, and
Richard Brown.
Yeah. And I only watched a little bit because they made me uncomfortable because of the reasons you were talking about. I was like, that Richard Brown guy, I felt like he was uncomfortable. He didn't know what he was getting into. And I was a little bit like, oh God, this is more contentious than that dude was prepared for. And so it made me chuckle because you refer to your quietism, but when it feels like you're not quiet about your quietism at all, it's like,
you should listen to my last video with Stan Patton, because he's a quietist too. And we were talking about like being loud quietists.
Well, no. And I think that's like, if there's something to be fired up about, being fired up about people feeling like people are being excluding a view or diminishing one or saying, oh, you must be a crazy idiot for not believing.
Can I give you some examples?
If you want to.
Yeah, because I people might wonder, like, is Lance for real? Yes, I am. So I was getting one of them ready to actually show you this. So let's see if I got it here. Here it is. So here is an argument that came up on Facebook a couple years ago, and my exchanges, for whatever reason, led to this person blocking me. So here is the argument. Premise one: it is evil to think that whether the Holocaust was good or bad for you depends upon whether you like it or approve of it. Two, some people subscribe to meta-ethical theories which imply that whether the Holocaust was good or bad depends upon whether they like it or approve of it. Three, and this is the conclusion, therefore, so some people are evil. And so what you see is that this person, their conclusion is not moral anti-realists are incorrect. It's that the type of moral anti-realists being described here are evil. They're evil. That is massively loaded moral language. Now, here's the thing. Do you think that this is a random person I found on Twitter or YouTube or something?
I would have guessed it was someone who was angry in your comment section or something. I don't know.
It is not. This is a professional philosopher. This is Jason Brennan, who's at Georgetown University. He's a big time philosopher. I've read his books. I've liked a lot of his work. And, this is part of the reason I was interacting with him on Facebook. And this is the kind of argument that I see from a professional philosopher. And this is a bad argument.
I think I could make it really pretty good with one more premise, which would be, if you think it's up to you and you approved of it, then I'd say if you were like, yeah, it's up to me and I approve of it, then you're evil. But
yeah, and I would agree with that. As an anti-realist, if someone approves of the Holocaust, I have no problem saying that person is an absolute scum of the earth piece of shit. They're awful. And so there seems to be this presumption, if you're an anti-realist, you can't say that. Yes, I can. I just did say that, and I'm perfectly happy to say that. And if you think there's a contradiction, bring it. Because I think
it's really interesting, because people will be comfortable with these abstract, weird consequences that can possibly come from their view if it's their view. But is it possible that a consequence of an anti-realist position could conceivably be that there's an anti-realist who wants to say, no, the Holocaust wasn't really wrong? Sure. But I could say that about, right? Like, the possibilities are endless. And when you were cashing out on the last awesome Lance rant, the Lant that you went on, that I was really enjoying and thinking about, it's like everything you're saying, when you were saying that, oh, we're going to come to really a whole lot of identical conclusions when it comes to like basic everyday ethics questions or applied ethics questions. I was thinking, yeah, everything about my view you could cash out in terms of someone's personal values or goals or subjective stances. And it's just as simple as saying, well, yeah, maybe you want to be a good person. Maybe one of your goals is to be a person who respects other people, right? Like it's like philosophers will throw down and get all pissed off about, well, I'm saying getting punched in the face is wrong because it hurts. And I'm saying, no, 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 no. What's really makes it wrong is that I don't want you to punch me in the face because it hurts. And well, I can get to the same conclusion pretty easily. Sorry, I want to read your next example, but
yeah, I was mostly putting it up for the audience and was happy for you to keep going. But this is the next one. I'll read it for the audience, especially because some people might be listening to this rather than watching.
Oh, okay.
So here's another argument that I put up on the screen. And both of these are from a blog post that I wrote, I don't know, a week or two ago. Now, these were public Facebook exchanges. You could see the little world symbol on the Facebook post. These were public posts. And that's why I was like, all right, I think these are worth discussing. So this is what Jason Brennan says. He says, moral anti-realism implies the following. 1, racism is not really bad, or, quote, it's not true that racism is bad, end quote. 2, the Holocaust was not really bad. 3, slavery is not really bad. And 4, it's not really good to help people. So he says these are things that are implied by anti-realism. Now, there's a mountain of problems with that. I have a whole, like, it's a very long blog post that's addressing the many, many issues with this. Now, what I'll say about this is that this use of the term really in these statements are what I call, well, I changed the name. So let me double check what I changed the name to. Right. Misleading modifiers. So I call these misleading modifiers because the issue is with that term really, it gives the impression, like if you said, like, let's just take a conversation on the street, right? Like you're just talking to a person on the street and that person said, yeah, the Holocaust wasn't really bad. I'm going to have a lot of concerns with that person. That person probably doesn't think the Holocaust is that bad. They're not that opposed to the Holocaust. They kind of be like, yeah, Holocausts are happening, whatever. Same thing for slavery. Like if the person said, yeah, slavery's not that bad. It's not really bad. I would be very concerned about this person. That person seems like they might be okay with slavery. Now, think about it in the context of an anti-realist. If by really you mean stance independently bad, all the anti-realist is saying is it's not, slavery is not stance independently bad. That tells you absolutely nothing about their attitude towards slavery, their conduct, their perspective, their position. A person could be the most aggressive abolitionist crusader in the world and technically be an anti-realist. They could be in the process. They could have captured a group of slavers. They're lining them up and they're like, hey, all you slavers, I'm going to one by one cut all your fucking heads off because I hate slavers. Technically speaking, slavery is not stance independently bad. Chop, 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 chop. It's completely consistent with anti-realism to do that. They're not making any contradictions when they do that.
No, I think there's
what is he doing here? Like he's implying anti-realists are cool with slavery. We're not cool with slavery. What the hell is he doing?
It's so weird. What's weird to me is, like, I would think that people would have recognized there is this level of abstraction. And when we're talking about it, and I think he hints at that, like, oh, well, I'm talking about first or second order things. But right, like none of this, it reminds me of some of the videos I ended up watching just because I started to critique things in my feed, and they're all like these weird, like philosophy of religion stuff, right? Like the person who doesn't believe in God doesn't believe in anything's really real, as if external world realism is exclusive to those who believe in a Christian conception of God, and or there aren't people who are going to believe in really, really real stuff and act as if it's really, really real unless they believe in God. And the same way, you could have an anti-realist who's willing to lay down their life for the slaves, right? And that's what I care more about. Oftentimes in these discussions, it reminds me of why I get feisty when I present stuff on Nietzsche or mention it, only because the people I tend to see in like an intro class or a undergraduate class who love Nietzsche for the same reason like people love Harry Potter. Like they had a shitty childhood, they were feeling disillusioned, or they had all the privilege in the world and they loved coming. They read it as I get to do whatever I want and I'm bigger and stronger and smarter than everybody else, so I can shit on them if I want. and I want to shake people out of that. I don't think there's anything really wrong or about some of the things Nietzsche said, but I'm guilty of that, of like, oh, if someone's espousing some sort of nihilist or anti-realist position, because of some of the people I see using those arguments, like they're all in Leopold and Loeb or something, Klebold and Harris sort of thing. I can see what the temptation is, but I would think someone would have the restraint to be like, let me ask a question, rather than like, your anti-realist positions mean you're committed to saying genocide's dope. Like that seems a little bit unfair.
Yeah, I would say it's a lot unfair. Yeah, it's just that there's a constant insinuation that anti-realists are okay with all these awful things. And I mean, one, that wouldn't make anti-realism false. It would just mean anti-realists are assholes.
Yeah.
That doesn't make you wrong. So I will make that point. But also, like, it's just not true that anti-realists are okay with this stuff. And so
Well,
I don't know why philosophers would constantly rely on pragmatic implication that anyone should be able to recognize on reflection is highly misleading. Like, if I went around saying, look, if you endorse the wrong theory of time, or, oh, you have a different interpretation of quantum mechanics, if you're a Copenhagen, you're probably embezzling money. That would be a really weird way to argue against the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum mechanics, that Copenhagians are a bunch of embezzlers. They're all engaged in financial fraud. Like, that's a weird way, because, like, one, it has nothing to do with whether the position is right or wrong. Like, this is one of the things I say in the blog post is I'm like, look, relativist views start in the same way that realist views do, like the anti-realist relativist views. They start with a descriptive analysis of the meaning of moral claims. So, the relativists might say, look, when people make moral claims, they're reporting their preferences. That's just the correct semantic analysis. Now, so what that would mean is that when a person says the Holocaust is bad, what that person means is, I disapprove of the Holocaust. Now, if you're just doing semantic analysis, you're doing philosophy the proper standard analytic way, and you come to the conclusion the correct semantic analysis of ordinary language is that people are reporting their preferences, and so you say, okay, so I'm a speaker relativist, that's my view. How the hell would that make you evil? So you're evil because you have the correct view about how language works?
No,
what the hell?
It's so tied
like,
to,
again, the implication relativists are evil is look, I'm just going to say it's fucking ridiculous. It's ridiculous because it has nothing to do with the person's actions or attitudes or behavior. It's ridiculous.
Well, I think that those are it's turning into a bad joke, maybe a worse joke, but the beginning of one is like a realist and an anti-realist walk into a bar, right? Like if I'm walking into a bar with an anti-realist and a realist and someone's going to start a fight with me, in no way, shape, or form do I feel like the realist is more likely to have my back. Do you know what I'm saying? Like and it would be insane for someone to think that. And similarly, I think when people, that's why I always say like neo-pseudo Kantian position is people have associations like, oh, you're a Kantian, you're going to say that no one should ever lie anywhere, all the time, everywhere. No, it's like, I take very seriously, I mentioned it a while ago, that this sort of foundational meta-ethical formal consideration has fuck all to do with how we practically apply it in the world, other than it's a guiding principle that we try to reflect on and say, hey, did I treat myself or everybody else with dignity and respect? And sometimes you have to do wrong things. It's people will be like, oh, well, you can never tell a lie. Yeah, I think that's not a logical consequence of a good interpretation of Kant's view. I think it's a misunderstanding. It's like, yeah, sometimes you might lie and sometimes lying will be the wrong thing, but it's the best option you got, right? People always use like Nazi at the door examples or murderer at the door sorts of examples against a Kantian view. I'm like, no, fuck no, lie your face off to the Nazi. No, I don't have any Jews in my closet. No, Anne Frank's not in there. Why? Because they've already removed themselves, in my view, from being a person that I can say, you're really acting rationally out of respect for yourself and everybody else. By having the jackboots and the swastika, you've already removed yourself. I can't trust that you're playing the same game we're playing. So yeah, I'll lie my face off to you. Am I doing something wrong? Maybe, whatever. Life's messy, right? Like theoretical math. An example that popped into my head when we were talking about the level of abstraction for metaethics and ethics. I did a lot of work with like learning outcomes and assessment of learning outcomes. And there was a paper, someone probably knows about it. You might have heard. Years ago, someone did research on like assessing outcomes, what outcomes were most important, and they were doing something on math. And they gave like these theoretical mathematicians, PhD candidates at MIT and Harvard, like some basic arithmetic problems that were like, change a recipe from being, the recipe was written for 10 people. How do you make it for 40 people? And they did not do well. Like these PhDs in theory didn't do well. Why? Because, well, you know, they're so specialized. They're not figuring out how many cookies to make. And so it was a timed thing. And like eighth graders did better than they did on it. And people are surprised by that. I'm like, that doesn't surprise me at all, because the meta ethics has nothing to do with whether or not you're going to have my back in the bar fight. I mean, that's a kind of crass example, but whether or not you're espousing your, you know, principled, objective, realist stuff, how many examples of the people who are supposed to be the paragons of virtue failing do we need? How many examples do you need of someone knowing something or understanding it or being able to make a good argument about it? Doesn't mean they can do it. I mean, that's all Aristotle, right? Like the difference between understanding something and possessing it. Ethics is that. Doing ethics is that you can give me a good argument for or against it. I have faith, Lance, that you'd be much better at having my back in that bar fight than realist who's puffing his chest out or whatever they're doing. Or maybe not. He's like, don't count on me, motherfucker. I'm letting
No,
you
I got your back. I got your back. I'll give you one more example.
Yeah.
And this is one of my favorites. Now I'll have to give you some other examples sometimes so you start seeing what I'm seeing. Check this one out. Oh, let me zoom in. This one is a lot of fun. Whoop. Where it starts. It is only a slight exaggeration to say that almost everyone believes in moral realism, and almost everyone, at least in the circles I usually move in, denies believing in it. Everyone, with the possible exception of psychopaths, feels that some things, stealing from a friend who trusts you, for example, are wrong. Not just illegal or imprudent, but wrong. And then he goes on to talk about this. The implication here is that, you know, people can say they're not a moral realist, but really they are. And why are they moral realists? Well, you have to be a psychopath to be an anti-realist. At least you'd very likely be a psychopath. And so because these people are not psychopaths, they're not really anti-realists. They're actually moral realists that are in denial. There is like 73,000 things wrong with this. I mean, this is wild.
The thing that jumps out to me that seems a little weird is that being an anti-realist would commit you to saying stealing from a friend who trusts you isn't wrong.
Yeah,
Like,
it doesn't commit you to that. But you know, this is what's so weird about this is it's often, you know, realists will think something like this. A lot of times, they think something like this. Things are only actually right or wrong if their stance independently right or wrong. So if you go around saying you're an anti-realist and you think things are right or wrong, they're just not stance independently right or wrong. You don't think anything's right or wrong, period. But anti-realists don't have to grant that. And we also have to pull apart our beliefs in the truth of particular propositions, right? So let's say you're a realist and you think torturing people for fun is stance independently wrong. Does that mean you don't also think it stands dependently wrong? Like you personally disapprove of it?
Yeah.
Probably not. You probably disapprove of it. So I reject the first one, but we agree on the second one. We both disapprove of it. From a motivational and practical perspective, the fact that you and I disapprove of it is good enough. It's good enough for me.
Well, no, I think it gets back to like two quick things because I don't know how I need to get going soon. And you've been so
I
gracious.
gotta get going too.
Everybody who's stuck
my
around.
dogs are bothering me. They want me to feed them.
Gracious. But the first thing is that it reminds me of like a objection or a frustration people have with Kant when they're like, oh, so I'm not really a good person if I actually want to tell the truth and I tell the truth because intentionally. No, that means you're in cooking. You're good. You don't need to be corrected by reflecting on it and realizing I did something shitty and it doesn't meet up to the standards that I have in my personal case of having the sort of Kantian sort of values I have. But then the other part of it is I see our disagreement, the weight of it, as one of us is wrong about something. That's it. Do you know how wrong I've been in my life about a whole bunch of shit? And both of us might be a little wrong, but if we were to cash it out in terms of real world examples, I bet I think any thoughtful version of anti-realism that you'd present and any version of realism that I'm going to present are going to come to the same conclusion a whole hell of a lot of the time. The same way any defensible version of consequentialism or an emotivism or sentimentalism, they're going to come to the same conclusions. It just gets back to is someone really wanting to fight about, oh, well, Lance says punches in the face are wrong because he views punches in the face as wrong because that's a part of his collection of values, which happens to include considerations of other persons because he recognizes whatever you recognize about people that makes you care about them or you empathize with them. Versus me saying, oh, it's wrong to punch them in the face because it violates their personhood. They didn't want to get punched in the face. Versus the consequentialist who's going to say, no, it's the hurt. It's the pain that you caused them. Or the sentimentalist is going to say, no, it's that an observer was capable of empathizing with the pain that was caused. And so they gave it a thumbs down. We're all roads lead to, where is it that all roads lead to? In that saying?
Rome?
Yeah, sure. All roads lead to the cow path pragmatically that gets you out of all the roads lead to Rome, right? Like, I care about who's going to, let's think about the way we're voting, think about what we're doing in the world. And it's why in my channel, I try not to overtly tell people what to think. It's like, consider these fucking arguments because there's cool things to learn. I will, for the next several weeks, because hopefully we'll do this again sometime, in the shower or wherever, I'll be thinking about something we talked about. And I'll be like, oh, my view, it might be marginally, like the tiniest margin. It'll get better because of it. That's what this is. That's what doing dope shit is. Unless you're Kanye West watching Dave Chappelle's edits. That's such a good, funny story. What do I do dope shit. That's what I do. Click. That's what I think we did. This is what's cool about philosophy. And what's so cool about YouTube philosophy is we would have never had an opportunity to have this sort of discussion. Not to dunk on each other or look cool.
I miss these kind of conversations. I had them in grad school when I had like roommates and we got to have these, and like sometimes around the philosophy department, I get into conversations.
Yeah.
We had so many cool conversations. And I stopped having those, and it's a big thing that's been missing from my life. And, I feel like, we have disagreements here, but there's a collaborative aspect to it. And I feel like some people get frustrated by that. Some people want to see blood sports. They want to see us arguing, fighting, disagreeing. And I think there's a time and place for that. I think that's a valuable thing to do, to be adversarial, to hold one another's feet to the fire. I also think collaborative discussions are really valuable too. And we don't see enough of those on YouTube. No. There's not that many of them. There's a lot of debate. And it's so much point scoring bullshit. I can barely stand watching most formal debates because of that point scoring, showboating bullshit that people do. It's not for me. I'm trying to like figure things out. I like to give people this quote from Wittgenstein. I never remember it exactly, but he said this in a letter to a friend. He said, Wittgenstein said, my father was a businessman, and I see philosophy in a business-like fashion. I want to get something settled. I want to get something done, and that's the approach I take to philosophy. And I want to figure things out. I'm concerned. Some philosophers, they're not. I think some of them, it's recreation. I think it's fun. And I think, at least on some implicit level, if they had to resolve or dissolve philosophical problems, it would take away their fun. Like, if we could put chips in our brain that would make us make perfect chess calculations, maybe that's impossible because of combinatorial explosions. But if it were somehow possible, we had Laplacian demon chips that we could draw on the resources of an entire other universe, whatever. Make it silly if you want.
Elon's got that shit. It's around the corner.
Yeah, maybe. So, and then not at all. So we're making those decisions where we like play a perfect game of chess. People would stop playing chess. It would trivialize the game. I mean, there's a point at which tic-tac-toe gets boring, and it's the point at which you
Yeah.
realize every game ends the same way in a draw. And that could happen with chess. It's like logically possible, and it would ruin chess. And I feel like philosophers see a lot of paradoxes and puzzles the same way. They don't want to solve them because the fun is playing with them. They're the toys.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's plenty of problems to solve and plenty of fun to be had. And I would guess most people who resist collaboration or seeing the similarities in views instead of just focusing on the differences um, are doing it for other psychological reasons. Makes them feel better about themselves. They get to feel like the big smartest person in the room or all of that. And everybody falls into that trap a little bit sometimes. Especially if you ever teach, right? You teach for years and it's like, you're the smartest person in the room. If you're not, something's wrong because people shouldn't be taking your class if they know more about what you're talking. And you get used to that. But the idea of the fun part for me is let's really explore. And I think the act of doing it well just makes you think better about other stuff, right? Like that's just an empirical kind of fact is struggling with the puzzles, doing the critical thinking is exercise in a way. So
I do
I
think
just
it has to be approached carefully because some of the ways that people approach things, they end up getting committed to methodological dogmas that could be really quite harmful. One of them that I always complain about is when people are, I think, too anti-empirical. Like people will insist this or that question. Empirical considerations are irrelevant. They're rarely irrelevant. There is the flip side of this, the scientifically inclined anti-philosophers that think everything is a science question. We don't need philosophy for anything. That's ridiculous too. So you have those perspectives.
Well,
You got to roll those out.
This is a great way for me to end, and then you can say all of the things you want, and I will happily listen. Is I always taught a paper to intro classes about a wisdom paper because break down philosophy into love of wisdom, give people an idea in an intro class of what we're doing. And there's a conception of wisdom. McKee and Barber is the paper or something, and they say wisdom, their epistemology of wisdom is that it's cases of overcoming illusions, right? Like philosophers are interested in tempting but wrong problems and overcoming them. We're not just memorizing stuff or learning the obvious stuff. And I think that's a really valuable way to approach what we try to do, in that if you're really trying to overcome the illusory, tempting, but wrong beliefs, any means necessary. It becomes super pragmatic. It's like, is science going to help? Sweet. Is armchair philosophy going to help? Yes. What can I learn from reading Sartre? Well, shit, that's not analytic enough. Well, no, there's something in there. Approach it on its terms and see what you can get. Well, let's go straight to Russell or Wittgenstein or the logical positivists if I need to feel. Let's see what we can get from all of it, because there is, oh God, don't hate me. There is value in all of it. And there's value to be found in all of it. And so to be like methodologically committed in a way where it's like I'm shitting on other people, I would do that in classes. I'd be like, continental stuff's not real philosophy, mostly to try to shake people to consider analytic philosophy a little bit. But yeah, I really like that idea of what we're trying to do is overcome tempting but wrong beliefs, overcome illusions, and whatever means necessary. And I think having a kind of discussion like this is an overlooked means to it, just like folks who are eschewing science or something are missing something. So I really do genuinely appreciate it.
Yeah, we can wrap things up here. I will make a comment about that. One of the issues that I have with the current state of academic philosophy is that all of the emphasis, or almost all of career advancement, is predicated. I mean, there's some aspects of teaching and administrative work on publication in prestigious journals.
Yeah.
That's what it's about. You got to publish. There's very little incentive for philosophers to collaborate. You talk about why everyone else is wrong and why you're right about everything. I don't think that's a good way to advance the field. I can't put this conversation on my CV and have it treated with anything like it would be laughed at. It would probably be harmful to put this on my CV.
Oh,
and so
absolutely.
if I sit here and, and if you have a big YouTube channel, you know, if you have a really, I won't name names to embarrass
Right.
people, but there's like big successful YouTube channels where people have awesome conversations, better than our conversations.
Yeah.
Not to sell ourselves short, but they do incredible work on YouTube. And I'll mention one. I don't care if he's embarrassed. Too bad, Kane. Kane B has an incredible channel. Let's look. Just real quick, I'm going to look at the number of subscribers that he has.
Right.
So Kane B, and his channel is pretty big. It's like surprisingly successful. 60,000 subscribers.
That's cool.
That's pretty sweet. Kane B, I don't know how many views he has. I bet it's, you know, well over 1 million. Like there's a lot of views on there. He's reached so many people with those videos, more people than you could reach in a lifetime in a classroom. Now, of course, there is a different context to a classroom, but this is also valuable. And this isn't treated as contributing something to the philosophical corpus in a way publishing in some top journal would be. Now, I'm not saying publishing in a top journal isn't an achievement worthy of praise. You got to write a good article to get it in there. But why isn't a YouTube video of value? Why isn't a blog post of value? Why isn't a conversation of value? These are all ways of contributing to and adding and building progress. And they're just not building progress. It's a very awkward way of saying things. Contributing to and progressing the field. And, you know, I will say live streams, you do end up saying stupid things and speaking inarticulately in a way where a published paper doesn't have that. But there's, you know, things can happen in conversations that you don't see in papers, like real-time feedback. So there are advantages and disadvantages. And I just feel like it's not appreciated.
I think that's an awesome place to kind of leave it, because that's something that's on my mind too, is the game that that you're playing and so many of the people in your chat and who watch your videos are playing. That is a real part of that game, having to feel like it's important to publish and protect one's ideas and take ownership of them. And it's not a game I have to play. But the one thing I'll say is you could be teaching at like an R1 spot and be voted greatest teacher in the world 20 years in a row. And that wouldn't hold any weight at certain places compared to if you published something in a journal named for your discipline. Like that's right. Like if you're in science, you did something right. If you're in philosophy of science, you did something right. If you're in ethics, you did something right. And that's the currency. And I think there is something important about that, but I also think teaching, engaging, there's something rad about it. So maybe we'll get you to 100,000 viewers, and then then you won't care. Maybe you'll just be like, this is so fun and cool. I'm making enough money to live on and it's all good.
I don't think that's going to happen. And I like teaching, and being connected to a university is pretty great. I just, you know, I feel like there should be more room for appreciating other types of value and contribution that can be made to a discipline. Well, and I also think in some ways it's, okay, but we got to wrap it up there. I got to go make dinner. So thanks so much for being here. I'll put a link to your channel in the description so everybody can go check that out. I also have to come up for a title for this video. So why don't we do this? Why don't the audience, you recommend in the comments after the video what you think I should title the video, especially if you stuck it out the whole way and you have a sense,
because it includes escargot. No, I'm just kidding. I shouldn't have said that.
No, it should include that. No, it should, because right now I just changed it to I can't believe it, and that's stupid. So we have to change it to something good. So we'll do that. Everyone go check out Philosophiculist. Check out that channel. Subscribe to this channel. Subscribe to Philosophiculist. Like the video. Share the video. Do the like. You got to say this. This is how you work with the algorithm to get up in YouTube's good graces. So everybody do all that stuff, and I will see you all later. And it is outro video time. So take care, everybody.